Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became the healing god and fell in love with Retsu Unohana? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The God of No Nation. The end of the war did not feel like a victory. It felt like silence. The blasted earth of the valley, gouged and vitrified by their final, cataclysmic battle, was unnervingly still. The wind that whispered through the craters carried the ghosts of jutsus that had torn the sky asunder. Sasuke was gone, having departed on his journey of atonement with a rare, quiet acknowledgement that passed between them without words. The allied shinobi forces were scattered, tending to the living and counting the dead. And Naruto Uzumaki stood at the epicenter of it all, feeling the last vestiges of a war that had defined his entire life finally, truly, settling. It wasn't just the quiet of the battlefield. It was a new quiet inside him. The boisterous, rumbling presence of Kurama was no longer a separate voice in his head. The distinct energies of Son Goku, Kokuo, Saiken, and the others were no longer individual threads. They had merged, fused, not just with each other, but with him. The Six Paths Sage mode that thrummed through his veins. It was an ascension he hadn't asked for and couldn't comprehend. He felt his own chakra, once a vast but quantifiable lake, become an ocean without a shore. He could feel the life force of the very planet breathing beneath his feet, a slow, deep, geological sigh. He could feel the collective hum of every living thing in the land of fire, flicker of a rabbit's heart in a distant burrow, the slow unfurling of a leaf on a tree 100 miles away, the faint, fading sparks of the recently deceased as their energy returned to the world. He was no longer just a container for the tailed beasts. He was the nexus. He was no longer just a shinobi. He was, more, a living embodiment of life energy itself. The power was absolute, terrifying, and profoundly lonely. It was a crown he had never sought, placed upon the head of a boy who had only ever wanted to be acknowledged. Now, he was so far beyond acknowledgement that he could barely feel the ground he stood on. He closed his eyes, trying to anchor himself to the familiar sensation of the wind on his face. But even that was different. He could feel the individual molecules of air, the subtle shifts in temperature. The path of every mote of dust. It was too much. The universe was shouting at him, and all he wanted was a moment of peace. And then, through the deafening roar of existence, he heard it. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. A psychic texture scraped across the surface of his new, boundless awareness. It was the taste of iron and ash, the smell of ozone and despair. The feeling of a million threads of life being violently, brutally severed all at once. It was a scream, but it was a scream made of pain itself, a chorus of agony so vast and so concentrated it was like a black hole in the vibrant tapestry of life he now perceived. His eyes snapped open. The familiar landscape of his world, which a moment ago had been overwhelmingly vivid, now seemed muted, a pale watercolor next to the jagged, raw wound he felt somewhere beyond his own reality. The scream was a hook, a psychic grappling line that had snagged onto the most powerful source of life energy it could find, him. What is that? He whispered to the empty valley. The hook pulled. Reality tore. It was not a gentle journey. There was no tunnel of light, no serene transition. It was a brutal, physical wrenching. The world dissolved into a smear of non-colors. He felt his body, which was now more concept than flesh, being stretched across an impossible distance. He saw glimpses of things he couldn't process. Geometric shapes that bled, stars that sang in discordant keys, voids that stared back. The very laws of his home dimension peeled away, replaced by a new, alien set of rules as being forced to learn by violent immersion. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. He was on his knees. Not in the familiar dirt of the valley, but on cracked, shattered asphalt. The air was thick, heavy, and tasted of static. It was filled with a pressure that was nothing like the natural energy he knew. This was refined, weaponized. He looked up, and his senses, still reeling, tried to make sense of the devastation. He was in a city. Or what was left of one. Buildings were sheared in half, their steel and concrete guts exposed to a sky that was an unsettling shade of twilight gray. Immense craters, larger than any caused by a tailed beast bomb, pocked the landscape. The destruction was precise, almost surgical in its totality. This wasn't the collateral damage of a war, this was the intended outcome. He pushed himself to his feet, his worn black and orange jacket feeling alien and out of place. His new perception, though disoriented, began to catalog the scene. He could see the lingering signatures of incredible power, vast, crushing pressures that felt like mountains, sharp, cutting energies that felt like razors, and a cold, manipulative power that felt like a spider's web, now thankfully gone. But the residue was everywhere. And so were the people. They were dressed in strange black robes, like his, but of a different cut. They carried swords, and they were all dying. His gaze swept across the battlefield, and his heart clenched. He saw them not as strangers, but as flickering lights, their life forces dimming like guttering candles in a gale. He saw a man, with white hair and piercing turquoise eyes, one arm and a leg gone, bleeding out onto the rubble. His life was a frantic, sputtering flame. Naruto could feel the boy's, he was so young, desperation, his frustration, his fading will. Not far from him, a girl with short, black hair was impaled on a slab of broken concrete, a gaping hole in her torso. Her life force was a weeping, fragile thread, so thin it was about to snap. He could feel her pain, her shock, and the crushing weight of her failure to protect someone. He saw a woman with wavy blonde hair, half of her torso missing, held in the AR. Ms. of a grim-faced man with a scruffy beard. He saw a large, masked man lying motionless. He saw a dozen others, scattered across the ruins, all in similar states of catastrophic injury. Their collective pain was a fraction of the great scream that had pulled him here, but it was immediate, raw, and real. It was right in front of him. The living were little better. A tall, languid man in a pink floral robe leaned heavily on his blades, his spiritual fire burning low. A small woman with dark, braided hair had her arm wrapped in a golden sash, her expression a mask of cold fury and exhaustion. They were all soldiers, he realized. An army that had just survived, barely, its own apocalypse. They hadn't noticed him yet. They were too lost in their own pain and shock. For a fleeting moment, the old Naruto, the impulsive genin, wanted to shout, to ask what happened, who they were. But that boy was a lifetime ago. The being he was now didn't need to ask. He needed to act. He was a god of life standing in a charnel house. The dissonance was intolerable. He didn't know these people. He didn't know their war, their enemies, or their world. It didn't matter. They were alive, and they were suffering. That was enough. He raised his right hand, palm open. Shunsui Kyoraku, captain of the 8th Division, thought he was hallucinating. The battle was over. Aizen was sealed. But the cost? He looked at Toshiro Hitsugaya, the prodigy captain, lying broken and bleeding. He looked at Momo Hinamori, a victim of Aizen's cruelty for a second time. He looked at Rangaku Matsumoto, his own lieutenant's closest friend, grievously wounded. They had won, but the Seraite would be paying the price for 1,000 years. His own energy was a shallow pool, barely enough to keep him standing. Then, a flicker of movement. A man appeared out of thin air, kneeling in the center of the devastation. He wore garish orange and black, colors so loud they were an insult to the somber gray of their reality. Shunsui's first thought was enemy. His hand tightened on Shinken Hakioken, every weary muscle screaming in protest. But the man just stood up. He looked around, his blue eyes, impossibly, shockingly blue, tacky, in the scene with an expression of profound sadness. He wasn't one of Aizen's. He didn't have the tainted pressure of an Irankar. He didn't feel like a Quincy. He felt different. He felt like standing in the sun after a long winter. It was warm, vast, and utterly alien. Before Shunsui could call out a warning, before the hyper-vigilant Soifin could flash step to intercept, the man in orange raised his hand. And the world was washed in gold. It wasn't a Kido spell. It wasn't a sudden burst of spiritual pressure. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated life. It flowed from the man in a silent, unstoppable tide. It was warm, like the first sun of spring, and it smelled of ozone and blooming flowers. It swept over Shunsui, and the deep, aching exhaustion in his bones simply vanished. The cuts and bruises on his body faded as if they were never there. His spiritual energy, moments ago a flickering ember, roared back to life, filling him to the brim. He gasped, his eyes wide. He turned his gaze to Hitsugaya. The boy captain's eyes were wide with disbelief as he stared at the space where his stump of an arm had been. New flesh, bone, and skin were weaving themselves into existence at a visible rate. The process was silent, seamless, and horrifyingly perfect. Within 5 seconds, a new arm, identical to the one he had lost, was whole. The blood on the ground was the only evidence he had ever been injured. His other wounds, the deep gash across his chest, the mangled leg, they were gone. Across the field, the same miracle was happening everywhere. Hinamori's hands went to her stomach, feeling smooth, unbroken skin where a hole had been punched through her. Rangaku Matsumoto sat up, her own catastrophic injury completely erased, her breathing no longer ragged. Azane Katetsu, who had been kneeling beside her dying captain, fell back in shock as Jashiro Yukitaki's coughing fits ceased, a healthy color returning to his perpetually pale face. Every cut, every broken bone, every fatal wound inflicted by Aizen and his espada, erased. It was an act of creation on a scale they could not comprehend. It was a power that made the very concept of healing, as they knew it, obsolete. It was not medicine. It was a fundamental reassertion of reality. A divine edit. The golden light faded, leaving behind and stunned, absolute silence. The only sound was the wind. Every captain, every lieutenant, every survivor, was now on their feet. Their wounds were gone. Their energy was restored, and every single one of them was staring at the blonde-haired man in the center of the devastation. Swords were drawn, not with aggression, but with a deep, instinctual fear. What do you do when faced with something that can unmake your death with a casual gesture? Who are you? Soifin, captain of the 2nd Division, asked, her voice tight and sharp. Her hand was a blur as she appeared behind him, the hornet sting tip of Suzumaki inches from his neck. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to register her as a threat. He simply lowered his hand and turned his head slightly, his blue eyes meeting hers. They were calm, ancient eyes. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said, his voice quiet but resonant. Carrying across the rubble-strewn field, I heard a cry for help. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, a new presence made itself known. It was a gentle, calming spiritual pressure, but beneath it lay an ocean of controlled power that every captain knew and respected. Stand down, Captain Soifin. The voice was serene, a balm on the raw nerves of the survivors. From behind a shattered skyscraper, a woman emerged, her long black hair in a thick braid over her chest. She wore the white haori of a captain over her standard shihakusho. Her expression was one of gentle concern, her smile placid, but her eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. She was followed by her taller, more timid lieutenant, Azane Katetsu, who looked utterly bewildered. Captain Retsu Unohana of T. He 4th Division had arrived to tend to the wounded, and had found none. She had felt it from a distance. A surge of energy unlike anything she had ever encountered in her 1,000 years of existence. It wasn't Ryutsu. It was purer, softer. It was the antithesis of everything she had seen today. It was the absolute, undeniable concept of life asserting itself against the backdrop of death. Her medical instincts, honed over centuries, screamed at her that what she was seeing was impossible. Regeneration of entire limbs. The complete restoration of spiritual pressure in dozens of captain-class individuals simultaneously. It was not healing. It was creation. A power that belonged to a god, not a man. She walked forward, her steps measured and silent. The other captains, even the volatile Soifin, deferred to her presence in this context. This was a medical situation, even if it was one that defied all medicine. Her eyes fell upon Naruto. He was young, but the power radiating from him was older than the Seraite. It was a gentle, warm sun, and she, a practitioner who had spent her life staving off the cold of death, was inexplicably drawn to it. Her own formidable healing abilities fell like a child's pail of water next to his endless ocean. The thought was not humbling. It was fascinating. She stopped a respectful 10 feet from him. Her gaze was not accusatory like Soifin's or wary like Shunsui's. It was the penetrating, analytical gaze of the master healer, the scientist, and the ancient warrior all at once. "You are the one responsible for this?" she asked, her voice as smooth as silk. Her placid smile did not waver, but her eyes bored into him, searching for the truth. Naruto met her gaze. In her, he sensed something different. The others were soldiers, their power like honed blades or crushing hammers. Hers was deeper. It was a vast, still lake that concealed its true depths. He could feel her mastery over the body, over the flow of life within it. But he could also feel something else. Something cold and sharp and impossibly old, locked away far beneath the surface. She understood both sides of the coin. Life and death. They were hurt, he answered simply, as if that explained everything. And to him, it did. Unohana's serene smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter, the only sign of her profound shock. The simplicity of his answer was more disarming than any boast. He saw a problem and fixed it, with no thought for the political or existential chaos such an act would cause. "The power to give life on such a scale is unprecedented," she stated, her words chosen with immense care. "Where do you come from, Naruto Uzumaki?" Before he could answer, the air itself seemed to grow heavy, compressing under the weight of an immense, ancient power. The sky, already a bruised gray, darkened further. An oppressive heat washed over the ruins, and the very rubble seemed to tremble. Every captain, without exception, snapped to attention, their fear of Naruto momentarily forgotten. Replaced by ingrained deference, an old man with a long, white beard braided down to his waist and a network of scars crisscrossing his bald head and muscular torso appeared in a vortex of flame. He wore a tattered captain's haori over one shoulder, his remaining arm resting on the handle of a simple wooden cane that pulsed with unimaginable power. Head Captain Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto had arrived. His one open eye, a burning coal of ancient fury and wisdom, swept over the scene. It registered his healed, revitalized captains, the absence of corpses, and the anomaly standing in the center of it all. His gaze was not one of gratitude. It was the gaze of a guardian who has just found a wolf of unknown power inside his sheep pen. "Report," he commanded, his verses. OICE a low rumble that vibrated in their bones. Shunsui Kyoraku stepped forward, giving a clipped, concise summary. The sealing of Aizen, their injuries, the sudden appearance of the stranger, the impossible, instantaneous healing. Yamamoto's eye narrowed, fixing on Naruto. The heat radiating from the old man intensified, scorching the air. You are not from this world. Your energy is foreign. Explain yourself." Naruto felt the old man's power. It was like standing next to the sun itself. A raw, destructive force of nature barely contained in a mortal shell. He respected it, but he was not afraid of it. He was a different kind of sun. A nurturing one. "I told her," Naruto said, his voice calm, gesturing his head toward Unohana. "I heard people in pain. And so I came." Yamamoto's eye twitched. Such a simplistic, childish answer for a being wielding godlike power. It was either the most profound truth or the most blatant lie he had ever heard. In either case, it was dangerous. "The Gote 13 is not a charity for you to dispense miracles to," Yamamoto growled. "Your power is an unknown quantity. Your motives are unknown. You are an unacceptable variable in a world that has just achieved a precarious balance." Byakuya Kuchiki, who had remained silent until now, spoke, his voice as cold and precise as his blade. "He must be detained. Central 46 will need to question him." "Detain him. Can you?" Kenpachi Zaraki suddenly barked, a wide, bloodthirsty grin splitting his face for the first time since the battle ended. He was looking at Naruto with manic glee. "Did you feel that? He didn't even try. Whatever he is, he's strong. Let's fight him." The head captain slammed the butt of his cane into the ground. The resulting shockwave silenced Zaraki instantly. Enough. Yamamoto's gaze did not leave Naruto. He was weighing his options. To treat this being as an enemy now, when his captains were still disoriented and the Seraite was in chaos, was foolish. To let him roam free was unthinkable. He needed to be contained, studied, understood. And for that, he needed the right handler. Someone with the intelligence to dissect his motives, the strength to be respected, and a domain that was both a prison and a place of observation. His eyes flickered to the serene captain of the 4th Division. "Perfect. You are a healer," Yamamoto stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Then you will be the guest of our master healer, Captain Retsu Unohana." Unohana inclined her head in a slight bow, her placid smile returning, this time genuine. An opportunity to study this miracle worker up close. It was a gift. "It would be my honor, head captain." Yamamoto turned his full attention back to Naruto. "You will accompany Captain Unohana to the 4th Division barracks. You will answer her questions. You will not leave her sight. You will submit to our authority until we can determine the nature of the threat you pose. Is that clear?" It was not a request. It was the decree of a king. Naruto looked from the fiery old man to the calm, enigmatic woman. He had been torn from his home, dropped into a war zone, and was now being politely imprisoned. Yet, he felt no anger. He was tired. He was adrift. And for the first time since his ascension, he was face to face with someone who seemed to look at him not as a weapon or a monster, but as a puzzle. The woman with the kind smile and the ancient, hidden blade in her soul. He gave a small, slow nod. All right. It was a quiet acquiescence, but for the captains of the Gote 13, it was the most terrifying display of power yet. He had listened to the absolute authority of their commander, weighed it, and simply agreed. As if it were his choice to make. Unohana's smile was warm as she turned to him. "If you would please come with me, Uzumaki-san. We have much to discuss." As he fell into step beside her, leaving the stunned and suspicious captains behind, Naruto took one last look at the shattered city. The great ream that had pulled him here had subsided, replaced by the quiet hum of the healed. He had answered the call. But as he walked toward the unknown spires of a place called the Seraite, he had a feeling his journey, and his troubles, had only just begun. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The 4th Division's Guest. The 4th Division of the Gote 13 was an island of tranquility in the turbulent sea of the Seraite. Here, the air did not crackle with the ozone of barely contained power, nor did it carry the scent of blood and steel. It smelled of medicinal herbs, clean linen, and the damp earth of carefully tended gardens. The shihakusha worn by its members were rarely stained with anything other than tinctures and salves. Their movements were not the explosive bursts of flash steps, but the measured, quiet hustle of healers going about their sacred work. It was a sanctuary built to mend what the other divisions were designed to break. And into this sanctuary walked a god. Naruto Uzumaki followed Captain Unohana, a silent island of impossible power in the calmest of divisions. The members of the 4th, from seated officers to the newest recruits, stopped what they were doing as he passed. They didn't stare with the open hostility or fear he'd seen on the battlefield. It was a different kind of awe, a professional reverence that bordered on religious terror. They were healers, and EY were looking at the living embodiment of their craft taken to its theoretical, impossible extreme. They had spent their lives learning to painstakingly stitch the fabric of life back together, thread by thread. This man had simply rewoven the entire tapestry with a wave of his hand. His presence was a soft, constant hum of golden energy that made the potted plants in the hallways straighten, ire leaves turning a more vibrant shade of green. It made the patients in the wards sigh in their sleep, their fevers breaking and their pain receding. He wasn't actively doing anything, it was the simple, passive radiation of his existence. He was a sun, and everything in his orbit felt his warmth. "They seem nervous," Naruto commented, his voice a low murmur meant only for the captain beside him. Unohana's placid smile remained. "You have rendered our entire profession obsolete in the span of 5 seconds, Uzumaki-san. They are not nervous. They are in the presence of a miracle and are trying to decide whether to worship it or dissect it." Her words were direct, yet held a hint of dry humor that he found surprising. Her lieutenant, Azane Katetsu, who walked a few paces behind them, fended at the bluntness of the statement but said nothing. "I don't want either of those things," Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping over a young Shinigami who quickly bowed and scurried away. "And yet, you may get both," Unohana said softly. "Power like yours does not allow for simple wants." She led him through a series of pristine corridors to a set of sliding doors at the very heart of the division's command structure. Her personal quarters. The room was spacious and minimalist, dominated by a low table, silk cushions, and a single, perfect ikebana flower arrangement in an alcove. A large window looked out onto a private, walled garden. The air was serene, a stark contrast to the storm of debate he could feel brewing in another part of the fortress city. It was a palpable thing to his new senses, a gathering of immense, conflicting pressures. Please, have a seat, Unohana gestured to a cushion. Azane, bring us some tea. Yes, Captain. Azane bowed deeply, her eyes flicking nervous L.Y. toward Naruto for a moment before she quickly departed, sliding the door shut behind her. They were alone. Unohana settled onto the cushion opposite him, her movements a study in fluid grace. For a long moment, she simply studied him, her dark eyes unblinking. It wasn't the wary gaze of a soldier or the covetous look of a scientist. It was the deep, penetrating observation of a master artisan examining a tool of impossible quality. The head captain will convene a meeting, she stated, not as a guess, but as a fact. The other captains will be there. They will debate what to do with you. Cap. Toin Kuretsuchi will demand your immediate vivisection. Captain Zaraki will demand a duel to the death. Captain Kuchiki will argue for your indefinite imprisonment under the authority of Central 46. He head captain will listen to all of them, and then he will do what he thinks is best for the stability of the Seraite. Naruto wasn't surprised. He had felt the nature of their energies on the battlefield. The cold, analytical curiosity from the man with the strange mask. The roaring, joyful bloodlust from the tall, scarred captain. The rigid, unbending pressure from the noble with the hair ornaments. And what will you argue? Captain Unohana, he asked, his own gaze steady. Her smile was a masterpiece of polite inscrutability. I will argue that a phenomenon is best understood through careful, prolonged observation. Rushing to a conclusion, whether with a scalpel or a sword, would be a waste of a singular opportunity. You want to study me, he said. It wasn't an accusation. I want to understand you. She corrected gently. There is a difference. I have dedicated a millennium to the arts of healing. I have mastered every Kido spell, every technique, every anatomical secret. I can mend a torn muscle, knit shattered bone, and coax a failing spirit back from the brink. What I do is a science. It is a craft. What you did. She paused, her eyes seeming to look past him, back at the battlefield. That was not a craft. You did not mend. You did not coax. You commanded. You looked upon the state of broken, and declared it whole. And reality obeyed. The door slid open as Azane returned with a tray, placing the tea service between them with trembling hands before bowing and exiting again. Unohana poured the steaming green tea into 2 delicate cups. My power is called Kaido, she continued, pushing a cup toward him. It is the art of healing. Tell me, Uzumaki Naruto, what is the name of your art? Naruto picked up the cup, the warmth seeping into his fingers. He thought for a moment, not because he was searching for a dramatic name, but because he had never been asked. It was just him. The power had no name because it was inseparable from his being. I don't have one, he said finally. It's not an art. It's not a technique. It's just life. I can feel it. In me, in you, in the wood of this table, in the stone of the walls. It's everywhere. When it's damaged, I just push more in. I fill in the gaps. Unohana's fingers tightened on her own cup. The simplicity, the sheer intuitive nature of his explanation, was more profound than any complex theory. I didn't see the body as a machine of organs and spiritual pathways to be repaired. He saw it as a vessel for an energy he commanded absolutely. You fill in the gaps, she repeated softly, a universe of meaning in her tone. When Captain Hitsugaya lost his arm, you filled a gap, the size of a limb. The energy, the matter, the spiritual particles to construct it, where did they come from? From me, Naruto said, taking a sip of tea. It was good, calming. It doesn't cost me anything. It's like asking a river where it gets its water. It just is. For the first time since he'd met her, a flick of something other than serene curiosity crossed Retsu Unohana's face. It was a brief, momentary shadow of profound, intellectual shock. A power that defied the fundamental laws of equivalent exchange. A creative force that generated something from, for all intents and purposes, nothing. It was the power of a creator. The sound of a distant, booming bell echoed through the Seraite, and the collected spiritual pressures he felt earlier converged on a single point. The meeting has begun, Unohana said, her composure perfectly restored. She stood. I must attend. My lieutenant will show you to your assigned quarters. They are comfortable. You will not be disturbed. But you will also not leave this division. I trust you understand. I do, Naruto said, standing as well. He met her eyes. Be careful. Not all of them want to understand. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. I have been handling my fellow captains for a very long time, Uzumaki-san. I am well aware. With a nod, she was gone. Her presence vanishing in a flicker of movement too fast for a normal eye to see. The 1st Division barracks was a place of stark, intimidating authority. In the center of the main hall, 12 of the most powerful beings in existence were gathered. Head Captain Yamamoto sat at the head of the assembly, his eyes closed, his presence a dormant volcano. The atmosphere was thick with tension. His power is an abomination. Mayuri Kuretsuchi, captain of the 12th Division, hissed, his voice a distorted rasp. He gestured wildly, his masked face twitching. He violates the conservation of spiritual matter. He creates biomass from an unknown energy source. The potential applications are limitless, but the risks are unacceptable. He is a biological anomaly of the highest order, and I demand the right to perform a full-spectrum dissection. We must know how he works. All I know is he made Toshiro-kun not dead, Shunsui Kyoraku drawled, tipping his straw hat down. And he got my favorite sake robe all dusty. I'd say he's a point in the pro column so far. Do not be flippant, Kyoraku, Byakuya Kuchiki said, his voice cold. This, Naruto Uzumaki, appeared without warning, possesses an unclassifiable ability. And has demonstrated power on a scale that could destabilize the entire Seraite. He is an unknown. By law, he should be handed over to the Central 46 for judgment. The Central 46 is currently a smoking crater full of corpses, in case you'd forgotten, Kenpachi Zaraki growled, his hand resting on the hilt of his chipped blade. Law doesn't matter. Strength does. He healed all of you like you were scuffed kids. That means he's strong. I want to fight him. I want to see if that power of his can heal him after I cut him in half. A manic grin spread across his face. Let's see how much life he has when he's in pieces. His healing ability is irrelevant if he can be killed before he can use it, Soifun added, her arms crossed. He showed no discernible combat speed. The Onmitsukido could have him neutralized or eliminated before he could even raise his hand. He is a strategic asset to be controlled, or a threat to be removed. Nothing more. The debate raged, a clash of diametrically opposed philosophies. Science, law, battle, and pragmatism. Finally, Yamamoto slammed his cane down, the sound cracking like thunder. Silence fell instantly. Unohana, the head captain rumbled, his eye opening to fix on her. You have spoken with the entity. Your assessment. Retsu Unohana stepped forward, her presence a pool of calm in the stormy room. I have, she confirmed, her voice even. He calls himself Naruto Uzumaki. He claims he was drawn here by the collective pain of our dying. His explanation for his power is simplistic. He describes it as an intuitive control over life force itself. He does not perceive it as a technique to be learned, but as an extension of his own being. A child's fantasy, Mayuri scoffed. Perhaps, Unohana conceded smoothly. Or perhaps it is a truth so fundamental that our own complex understanding of Ryutsu and Kido cannot process it. He shows no malice, no ambition. His motivations, as stated, were purely altruistic. When I asked him the name of his art, he said it did not have one. Zaraki let out a short, sharp laugh. Heals everyone, has no reason for it, and his power doesn't even have a name. He's EIT. Her the biggest idiot in the universe or the most dangerous. Indeed, Unohana agreed, her smile unwavering as she looked at Kenpachi. That is the dichotomy we face. My recommendation is one of caution and observation. His power is restorative, not destructive. To treat him with immediate hostility would be to potentially turn a powerful, neutral force into a dedicated enemy. He is currently a guest in my division. I propose we keep it that way. Let me study him. Let me understand the source of his power and the truth of his character. A living miracle is of more use to us than a dead specimen or a prisoner in Mugen. Her logic was sound, her argument unimpeachable. She offered a path that satisfied no one's immediate desires but denied no one's future options. It was a masterful political maneuver. Yamamoto was silent for a long minute, his ancient mind weighing the countless variables. An entity that could negate the cost of war, the potential was staggering. But anything that powerful could surely be inverted. A god of life could, perhaps, become a god of plagues. Very well, he declared finally. He remains in your custody, Unohana. You are responsible for him. Learn everything you can. The rest of you will treat him as a guest of the Gote 13. You will not engage him. You will not provoke him. And you, Kenpachi, will not challenge him. Am I understood? Zaraki just grunted. The promise of a future fight enough to keep him placated for now. Mayuri seethed silently, but obeyed. The matter is settled, Yamamoto said. For now. Naruto's quarters were more like a small house than a room. They were clean, sparse, and opened into the walled garden he had seen from Unohana's office. He spent the afternoon simply sitting on the veranda, trying to process. He was a prisoner, albeit a comfortable one. He was in a new world, a new reality, with rules he didn't understand. And he was alone. The familiar presences of his friends, his village, his entire world, were gone, replaced by a void. His loneliness was a vast, echoing chamber. For all his new power, he had never felt so small. When Unohana returned, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the garden. She carried no pretense of authority now. She simply walked into the garden and stood beside him, her gaze on the carefully raked sand and precisely placed rocks. The debate concluded as I predicted, she said, breaking the silence. You are to remain my guest. A prisoner, Naruto corrected, his tone not bitter, just factual. A subject of intense and fearful curiosity, she countered. A prison is for something you understand and wish to contain. You, Uzumaki-san, are something no one here understands at all. That makes you far more dangerous. He looked at her, at the serene profile outlined against the twilight. You're not afraid of me. Fear is a reaction to a threat one cannot control or overcome, she said, turning her head to meet his gaze. I do not yet know if you are a threat. And I have a great deal of confidence in my ability to handle threats. There it was again, the hint of steel beneath the silk. The quiet, absolute confidence of a warrior. He was beginning to see that her placid smile was a sheath, and he wondered what kind of blade it was meant to conceal. His eyes drifted from her to the garden. He noticed a small, ornamental plum tree in the corner. It was withered, its branches brittle and its bark peeling. It was the only spot of decay in the otherwise immaculate space. A stark reminder of mortality in the heart of the healing division. Why is that one dead? He asked, nodding toward it. Unohana's gaze followed his. A flicker of something, sadness, crossed her face before being smoothed away. It was a gift, a long time ago. A rare cultivar from the human world. Despite all our skill, we could not make it take root in the soil of the Soul Society. It has been dying for a century. We keep it as a reminder. A reminder of what? That some things cannot be healed. She said softly. That even for us, death is an inevitable, final victor. Naruto stood up. He walked across the grass, his bare feet making no sound. He stopped before the withered tree and reached out. His hand hovering over the dead bark. He could feel it. The absence of life. The slow, inexorable process of decay. The final, quiet surrender. He disagreed. He placed his palm gently on the trunk. He didn't flood it with power. He didn't perform a jutsu. He just offered. He opened a channel from his own infinite ocean and let a single, gentle stream flow into the tree. Unohana watched. Her breath caught in her throat. A soft, golden light, no brighter than a candle flame, pulsed from his hand. It was not a violent infusion. It was a tender persuasion. He was reminding the tree what it felt like to be alive. The dry, gray bark began to change. A faint, healthy brown blush spread from where his hand rested. The brittle branches trembled, and then, at the very tip of a twig, a single green bud pushed its way into existence. Then another, and another, a cascade of impossible life. Within 30 seconds, the entire tree was covered in vibrant green leaves. A moment later, Tight pink buds swelled and burst open into fragrant plum blossoms, their sweet scent filling the evening air. The dead tree, a century-long symbol of failure and mortality, was alive and in full, glorious bloom. Naruto pulled his hand back, a small smile on his face. It wasn't dead. It was just lonely. It forgot how to connect. Unohana stared at the blossoms, her mind, a fortress of logic and 1,000 years of experience, completely and utterly besieged. The mass healing on the battlefield was a display of raw power. This was an act of intimate, gentle creation. It was a refutation of her most fundamental belief, the finality of death. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she had ever seen. She found herself taking a step closer to him, her professional curiosity now inextricably tangled with a deep, personal fascination. How? She whispered, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 questions. Everything wants to live, Naruto said, turning to her, his blue eyes reflecting the pink of the blossoms. Sometimes it just needs a reminder that it's not alone. His words struck a chord deep within her, a place she had kept locked and silent for centuries. The loneliness of absolute power. The burden of being singular. She, Yakiru Unohana, the first Kenpachi, understood that feeling better than anyone. And this strange boy, this god in an orange jacket, had just given it a name. Before she could process this startling moment of connection, a frantic energy signature appeared at the edge of the garden. Captain Unohana, Azane. Katetsu's voice was strained with panic. She didn't dare enter the private garden without permission, but her urgency was palpable. Unohana tore her gaze from Naruto and the impossible tree, her captain's mask snapping back into place. What is it, Azane? A report from a patrol in the 78th district of the Rukongai. The one we lost contact with earlier. A second squad was sent to investigate, N.D. They just sent a hell butterfly with their final report. I don't know how to describe it. As Azane spoke, Naruto frowned. A faint, unpleasant sensation brushed against his awareness. It was cold, empty. It was the negative image of the life force he felt everywhere else. A patch of static in the universal song. What did they report, Lieutenant? Unohana asked, her voice sharp. Azane took a deep breath. They described an area, a creeping patch of what they called gray rot. It's not a creature. It's not an energy. It's a phenomenon. Anything it touches, the ground, buildings, even air, doesn't get destroyed or corrupted. It just stops existing. It leaves behind a perfect, featureless void. One of the squad members touched it. His arm, from the fingers to the elbow, was just gone. No blood, no wound, no spiritual particles, just nothing. Unohana's eyes widened slightly, a power that erased matter and energy from existence. That was a threat on a conceptual level. And the squad, she pressed. Azane's voice trembled. Their connection was cut moments after the report. We believe the rot, it expanded and consumed them. As Azane finished, a shiver ran down Naruto's spine. That was it. The feeling. The cold whisper. It was the sensory equivalent of a perfect vacuum. The absolute absence of life. It was a violation. A deep, fundamental wrongness that grated against the very core of his being. He looked at Unohana, his expression now serious, the gentle smile gone. I can feel it, he said, his voice low. From here, it feels like a hole, like a tear in the world. Unohana stared at him, then at the blooming tree, and then back at him. A man who could command life with a touch, and who could sense the signature of absolute nothingness from miles away. Her guest was becoming more complex, more important, and infinitely more dangerous with every passing minute. She looked out from her serene garden, past the walls of her division, toward the distant, impoverished districts of the Rukongai. A new, incomprehensible threat had just emerged, and the only being in existence who seemed to have any innate understanding of it was standing right next to her. Her assignment had just changed. She was no longer just studying a miracle. She was now guarding the only thing that might be able to stand against an abyss. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sun and the Unchained Blade. The days that followed settled into a strange, tense rhythm. Naruto was a ghost in the hallowed halls of the 4th Division, a silent, sun-drenched phantom whose very presence as a quiet rebellion against the established order. He did not speak much, but he observed. He watched the healers work, their brows furrowed in concentration as they performed complex Kido, their Han-ds glowing with green light as they painstakingly guided Retsu to close wounds. He saw the care, the dedication, the sheer effort it took them to do a fraction of what he could accomplish with a thought. He felt not superiority, but a strange sort of empathy. They were trying so hard. His time was spent mostly in the garden with the now blooming plum tree. It had become a focal point for the entire division. A quiet testament to the impossible. Healers would make excuses to walk by, stealing glances at the vibrant blossoms, whispering among themselves. They were afraid of him, yes, but it was a fear now mingled with a deep, profound reverence. Unohana was a frequent, if not constant, presence. Their conversations were not interrogations. They were exchanges, quiet explorations of philosophy between two beings who existed at the pinnacle of their respective arts. She would ask him about his home, and he would describe the feel of wind through the leaves of the great tree in Konoha, the taste of ramen from a street stall, the warmth of the sun on the Hokage monument. He spoke of it not with longing, but with a fond, distant memory, like a man describing a home he knows he can never return to. In turn, he would ask her about the Soul Society. She explained the flow of souls, the cycle of reincarnation, the balance between the worlds. She spoke of it with the dispassionate clarity of a scholar who has studied the same text for 1,000 years. This, gray rot, Naruto said one afternoon, looking up from the koi pond where the fish swam with unusual vigor in his presence. You called it a phenomenon. But it feels deliberate. It feels hungry. Unohana, seated on the veranda, took a slow sip of tea. The reports are being analyzed by Captain Kuretsuchi. So far, he has determined only what it is not. It is not composed of spiritual particles. It does not radiate Retsu. It is, by all measurable standards, a void. A patch of anti-existence. It's an enemy, Naruto stated simply. He could feel it, that pinprick of absolute cold at the edge of his senses. It hadn't grown, but it hadn't shrunk, either. It was waiting. It's the opposite of me. Life requires an opposite, Unohana mused, her eyes distant. Death, destruction, endings. They are a natural part of the cycle. But this is not an end. It is an erasure. There is a fundamental difference. Before Naruto could respond, the tranquility of their philosophical debate was shattered. It started not with a sound, but with a feeling. A colossal, jagged spike of spiritual pressure slammed into the serene atmosphere of the 4th Division like a thrown axe. It was a raw, untamed, joyous thing, full of bloodlust and manic glee. The koi in the pond scattered. The birds in the plum tree fell silent. Every healer in the division froze. A primal fear seizing them. Then came the sound. A crash of splintering wood and shattering roof tiles from the direction of the main barracks, followed by a roar that was pure, unadulterated excitement. Where is he? The Golden One. I know you're hiding him in here, Unohana. Naruto stood up, his expression more weary than alarmed. He recognized the energy. The scarred captain from the battlefield. The one who had looked at him like he was a feast. Unohana rose gracefully, her face a mask of serene disapproval. It seems Captain Zaraki has grown tired of waiting. She began to walk toward the source of the commotion, Naruto falling into step beside her. They emerged from the quiet of her personal wing into the main courtyard of the division. The sight was one of controlled chaos. Dozens of 4th Division members were pressed against the walls, their faces pale. In the center of the courtyard, having torn a hole straight through the roof of a nearby building to make his entrance, stood Kenpachi Zaraki. His eye patch was still on, but it did little to contain the volcano of power erupting from him. The sheer force of his Retsu cracked the flagstones beneath his feet. Perched on his shoulder, the small, pink-haired girl who was his lieutenant, Yakiru Kusajishi, clapped her hands in delight. There he is, Kenny. I see him. The Goldie man, she squealed, pointing a tiny finger at Naruto. Zaraki's head snapped toward them. A grin that was all teeth and joyful violence split his face. It was a predator's grin, one that promised pain and exhilaration. His eyes, however, were fixed solely on Naruto, dismissing Unohana as if she were part of the scenery. You, he boomed, his voice a gravelly rumble. I'm done with meetings and talk. You're strong. I'm strong. Let's fight. Right here. Right now. Unohana stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. Her smile was still present, but it did not reach her eyes. The air around her grew colder. Captain Zaraki, your behavior is unacceptable. You are disturbing the peace of this division and violating a direct order from the head captain. Zaraki just laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Orders are for people who can't decide things for themselves. I've decided I want to fight him. Get out of the way, Unohana. This has nothing to do with you. On the contrary, she replied, her voice dropping, taking on a dangerous edge that made the surrounding healers flinch. He is my guest, and under my protection. You will stand down, or I will be forced to compel you. Zaraki's grin faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked at Unohana, truly looked at her, and for a moment, a flicker of ancient instinct, a memory of a fight long past, seemed to surface in his eyes. But it was quickly overwhelmed by his current obsession. You can try, he grunted, shifting his attention back to Naruto. But he's the one I want. Don't hide behind her, he taunted, his eyes glinting. Unless you're a coward. Naruto sighed. It was a quiet, tired sound, but it cut through the tension. He placed a hand on Unohana's shoulder. It's all right, he said, his voice calm. He stepped past her, moving into the center of the courtyard to face the towering captain. I'm not going to fight you. Zaraki's eye twitched. What? There's no point, Naruto said, his hands in his pockets. I won't kill you. You can't kill me. It would be a waste of time. Zaraki's grin vanished completely, replaced by a snarl. Everyone can be killed. You just have to cut them hard enough. Yakiru, get back. The TLE lieutenant giggled and vanished in a blur of speed, reappearing on a distant rooftop to watch. Zaraki's right hand shot out and grabbed the hilt of his Zanpakuto. The blade, chipped and battered from 1,000 battles, seemed to hum in anticipation. Last chance, Zaraki growled. Draw your weapon. I don't use one, Naruto replied evenly. For Zaraki, that was the final insult. With a roar, he moved. He wasn't using Shunpo. It was just raw, explosive power, covering the distance between them in an instant. His blade came down in a brutal, cleaving arc meant to split Naruto from head to toe. Naruto moved. He didn't flicker. He didn't blur. He simply wasn't there. He took a single, unhurried step to the side, the wind from Zaraki's monstrous swing rustling his jacket. The Zanpakuto slammed into the stone courtyard, shattering the ground and sending a web of cracks spreading out for 20 feet. Zaraki stared at the crater, then at Naruto, who now stood a few feet away, his expression unchanged. You're fast, Zaraki admitted, a flicker of excitement returning. He spun, his blade now swinging in a horizontal arc. Again, Naruto simply sidestepped, his movement economical and impossibly fluid. I told you, Naruto said. This is pointless. Shut up, Zaraki bellowed, his frustration mounting. He launched into a furious barrage. Slashes, thrusts, cleaves, a whirlwind of destruction that tore the courtyard to pieces. Slabs of stone were thrown into the air, buildings were gouged, and the very air shrieked under the assault. But Naruto was an untouchable ghost in the heart of the storm. He never moved more than a few feet, his evasions so precise and calm they seemed to mock the sheer ferocity of the attack. He wasn't just dodging, he was flowing around the attacks, veer parting around a series of jagged rocks. Unohana watched, her hands tucked into her sleeves, her expression unreadable. She had seen Kenpachi fight countless times. He was a force of nature, overwhelming his opponents with pure, unstoppable pressure. But this was different. He wasn't fighting an opponent. He was fighting a concept. The concept of futility. Finally, Zaraki changed tactics. He feinted a high swing, then spun low. His blade aimed at Naruto's legs. It was faster than his previous attacks, a desperate, instinctive move. This time, it connected. The blade sliced across Naruto's calf. Not deep, but a definite hit. The surrounding healers gasped. Zaraki's grin returned, triumphant. But the grin died as he watched. A thin line of blood welled up, and then, before a single drop could fall to the ground, a soft golden light traced the path of the cut. The skin knitted itself together, leaving no trace of the wound. The entire process took less than a second. Naruto looked down at his leg, then back at Zaraki. See, quote. Zaraki stared, his mind struggling to process it. He'd cut him. He'd felt the blade bite. And it was just gone. The excitement surged, hotter and more manic than before. So you heal fast. He roared with laughter. Good. That just means I can cut you more. He ripped the eye patch from his right eye. A tidal wave of golden spiritual energy exploded from him. A pillar of raw power that shot into the sky. The pressure in the courtyard increased tenfold, cracking the walls of the surrounding buildings and forcing the spectators to their knees. This was the real Kenpachi Zaraki. Unsealed, unrestrained. Now the fun begins. He vanished. Even to Unohana's experienced eyes, his speed was immense. He appeared directly in front of Naruto, his blade a blur aimed at his heart. This time, Naruto didn't dodge. He raised his hand and caught the blade. Not the flat, not the hilt. He caught the sharpened, spiritually infused edge in his bare palm. A deafening clang, like a temple bell being struck, echoed through the seraite. The shockwave blasted outwards, shattering every window in the division. Zaraki's eyes went wide with disbelief. His full power strike, a blow that could cleave a skyscraper, had been stopped cold by an open hand. A line of blood appeared in Naruto's palm where the blade rested, but like the cut on his leg, it was already closing. The golden light of his power overpowering the immense destructive force of Zaraki's Retsu. I'm done playing, Naruto said, his voice quiet, but now holding a weight that seemed to press down on the world. His blue eyes, once calm, now held the intensity of a star. He tightened his grip on the blade, and with a grunt of effort, Zaraki found himself unable to move it. He was locked in a test of strength with a man who wasn't even straining. Let's try this a different way, Naruto said. And he let go of the blade and placed his open palm on Zaraki's chest. Zaraki felt it instantly. It wasn't a blow. It wasn't a Kido spell. It was a flood. A tidal wave of warm, overwhelming energy poured into him. It was the same golden power that had washed over them on the battlefield, but this time it wasn't gentle. It was a pressurized torrent, a force feeding of pure, unadulterated life. Every muscle in his body, screaming with the effort of his unsealed state, was instantly soothed. The microscopic tears, the burn of exertion, erased. His spiritual energy, which he was burning like a furnace, was being replenished faster than he could expend it. A small cut on his cheek from a piece of flying debris sealed itself. He swung his sword again, trying to break the contact. He slashed Naruto across the chest, a deep, brutal wound that would have been fatal to anyone else. It was gone before his blade finished its arc. The fabric of Naruto's jacket mended itself a second later. Zaraki roared in frustration and attacked again. And again. And again. He was a hurricane of steel, a maelstrom of destruction, cutting and slashing at the unmoving figure before him. Each blow landed, each cut was deep and vicious, and each one was healed instantly, negated by the endless flood of life pouring into him from the hand on his chest. This wasn't a fight, it was an exercise in absolute futility. From Zaraki's perspective, it was torture. The joy of battle came from the exertion, the pain. The feeling of pushing his body and spirit to their absolute limits, dancing on the edge of death. Naruto was denying him all of it. He was being drowned in vitality. His power was being refueled against his will. The thrill of spending his energy was replaced by the oppressive, suffocating feeling of being perpetually, infinitely full. He couldn't get tired. He couldn't get hurt. He couldn't feel the glorious burn of a true fight. Fight back, he screamed, his voice raw with a desperation he had never known. He was landing fatal blows every second, and his opponent just stood there, his expression one of grim resolution. Taking it all without flinching. I am, Naruto said, his voice strained with the concentration of containing Zaraki's onslaught. Zaraki poured more and more of his power into his strikes, his Retsu flaring wildly, his movements becoming more frantic. He was trying to outpace the healing, to inflict a wound so grievous that even this monstrous power couldn't fix it in time. But it was like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. For every gallon of water he threw out, a tsunami poured back in. The other captains had begun to arrive, drawn by the titanic clash of energies. Soifun, Byakuya, Shunsui, and others stood on the rooftops, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and horror. They were watching their most powerful brawler, their force of nature, being systematically non-violently dismantled. Finally, with a final, desperate roar that ended in a choked gasp, Kenpachi Zaraki faltered. His movements slowed. His unsealed power, constantly replenished, had become a crushing burden on his soul. His mind, deprived of the release it craved, was fraying. He had expended enough energy to level the Seraite 10 times over, yet he was physically unharmed. Filled to bursting with an energy that wasn't his own. His sword drooped. His arms fell to his sides. He stood there, panting, sweat pouring down his face, completely and utterly spent, not from injury, but from pure spiritual and mental exhaustion. He had been defeated without receiving a single lasting wound. Naruto finally removed his hand. He looked at the broken, trembling warrior before him, not with triumph, but with a deep, profound pity. Zaraki dropped to his knees, his zanpakuto clattering to the ground. He looked up at Naruto, his one good eye wide with a confusion and frustration so deep it was almost childlike. He had given his all, and it had meant nothing. He fell forward, unconscious. Silence descended upon the courtyard, broken only by the whistling wind through the holes in the buildings. Naruto stood over the fallen captain, his own breathing steady, his clothes torn but his body pristine. He had won. He had dominated. And he had done it through an act of absolute, oppressive life. Unohana had not moved. She had watched the entire exchange, her placid mask unshaken. But behind her eyes, a storm was raging. She had seen more than a fight. She had seen a clash of philosophies. And one had utterly crushed the other. She looked at the fallen form of Kenpachi Zaraki, the man who had inherited her title, the man whose entire existence was a mirror of her own blood-soaked past. The joy of the cut, the thrill of the fight, the search for a worthy death, that was the song of the Kenpachi. It was a song she had composed, a song she had once sung with glee. And this man, this golden-haired god, had just demonstrated a power that rendered that entire song meaningless. He hadn't just defeated Kenpachi. He had refuted his entire existence. He had shown him that there was a power beyond the struggle of life and death, a power of such absolute life that death couldn't even find purchase. In that moment, her fascination with Naruto Uzumaki solidified into something else. Something far more potent and dangerous. It was respect. A profound, soul-shaking respect for a power and a philosophy so completely alien, and yet so fundamentally superior to the one that had defined her for a millennium. She looked at Naruto, who was now turning to face the assembled captains on the rooftops with an unreadable expression, and she felt a flicker of a feeling she hadn't experienced in centuries. It was the thrill of discovering something truly, beautifully new. As if on cue, a hell butterfly, its wings glowing with frantic energy, fluttered into the courtyard. Ignoring everyone else and heading straight for the spot where head captain Yamamoto had just appeared in a swirl of flame. The old man caught the butterfly, his expression grim as he absorbed the message. His one eye fixed on Naruto, his gaze now holding a sliver of something other than suspicion. It was reluctant consideration. He turned to the other captains. "Emergency report from the Rukongai," he announced. His voice a low growl that cut through the silence. "The anomaly in District 78 is no longer a passive phenomenon." Naruto's head snapped up, his senses locking onto that cold spot in the distance. It had changed. It was no longer just a hole. It now had a focus. A malicious intelligence. Yamamoto's gaze fell upon the unconscious Kenpachi, then to Naruto. "It has taken a form," the head captain declared, his voice grim. "A creature made of nothingness. And it has begun to hunt." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Hollow of Nothingness. A state of emergency descended upon the Seraite with the speed of a guillotine. The casual tension that had followed the war with Aizen was gone, replaced by a sharp, cold dread. Hollows, Arankars, even rogue Shinigami, these were known threats. They operated within the established rules of existence. They had spiritual pressure, they could be cut, they could be killed. This new threat was different. It didn't play by the rules, it erased the game board entirely. The 1st Division barracks became the nerve center of the crisis. A massive tactical map of the Rukongai was spread across the floor, with the 78th District, Anabe, marked in stark, ominous black. Reports, delivered by frantic hell butterflies, painted a grim picture. The gray rot had coalesced, pulled itself together into a shifting, vaguely humanoid shape. It was not a hollow, for it had no mask and no hole. It was not a Shinigami, for it had no Retsu. It was a silhouette of absolute anti-existence, a walking, silent patch of void. Its movement is slow but deliberate, reported a grim-faced Omaeda Marekio, Soifin's lieutenant, his usual bluster completely absent. It does not run or use flash step. It simply expands in a given direction. Anything it touches, souls, the ground, buildings, vanishes, not destroyed, vanishes. We have lost contact with 3 full patrol squads. They didn't even have time to scream. Head Captain Yamamoto stood over the map, his face carved from stone. Byakuya, Hitsugaya, take your divisions. Establish a perimeter. Do not engage directly. Your objective is containment and observation. Find a weakness. Kido Corps, prepare a network of high-level Bakudo. We will attempt to bind it. Sir. Toshiro Hitsugaya and Byakuya Kuchiki acknowledged in unison, their expressions hard. They vanished in a blur of Shunpo, their CA. Tane's howries whipping in the displaced air. A moment later, the sharp crackle of Kido being woven filled the air as Tessai Tsukubishi and his corps mobilized. Naruto and Unohana had not been summoned to the meeting. But they didn't need to be. The ripples of panic and command spread through the Seraite, and Naruto could feel the focus of it all, that cold, hungry spot in the distance. They stew. In the now ruined courtyard of the 4th Division, where Kenpachi Zaraki's unconscious form was being carefully levitated onto a stretcher by a team of healers led by a visibly stressed Azane. You're treating it like an enemy they can fight, Naruto said, his gaze distant, focused on something only he could truly perceive. They're going to get people killed. It is the only way we know, Unohana replied, her voice low. She was watching her subordinates tend to Zaraki. They were healing the few superficial scrapes he had, but the real damage, the profound spiritual and mental exhaustion, was beyond their ability to treat. It was a wound of the soul. We face a threat, we analyze its power, and we devise a counter. It has been our way for 1,000 years. But you can't counter nothing, Naruto countered, turning to her. You can't cut it, you can't burn it, you can't bind it. It's like trying to put a leash on a hole. The leash just falls in. His simple, agricultural analogy as more insightful than anything the Shinigami strategists had yet considered. He understood the threat on a fundamental, intuitive level that they, with all their centuries of combat experience, could not grasp. He wasn't thinking about how to fight it, he was thinking about what it was. Unohana looked from the defeated Kenpachi to Naruto's serious face. What do you suggest, then? You don't fight a hole by attacking it, he said. A spark of clarity in his eyes. You fight it by filling it up. Before their conversation could continue, a junior officer from the 1st Division appeared in a nervous flash step. Captain Unohana, Uzumaki-san, the head captain requests your presence at the Senkaimon. Immediately, the journey to the massive gate that connected the Seraite to the outside world was a blur. The usual calm of the fortress city was gone. Shinigami were running everywhere, barking orders, preparing for a war against an enemy they couldn't even comprehend. At the base of the Senkaimon stood Yamamoto, his presence a blazing sun of grim authority. With him were Shunsui Kyoraku and Jashiro Yukitaki, their usual easygoing demeanors replaced by a hard-edged seriousness. Yamamoto's single eye fell on Naruto. There was no more suspicion. There was no more debate. There was only the cold, hard pragmatism of a commander facing a crisis. Hitsugaya's initial report is back, he stated without preamble. Senbon Sakura's blades dissolve a foot from the target. Hirinmaru's ice sublimates into nothingness on contact. Bakudo number 81, Denku, a shield that can stop Kido up to level 89, was erected. The creature walked through it as if it wasn't there. It consumed the barrier and the casters. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. An enemy that could ignore Byakuya's Bankai, negate Hitsugaya's power, and walk through the strongest defensive barrier in their arsenal. It was, by their standards, invincible. Uzumaki, Yamamoto said, his voice a low growl. It was the first time he had used Naruto's name. You told Captain Unohana you can feel this thing. You said it is your opposite. Explain. It's an absence of life, Naruto said simply, meeting the old man's gaze without flinching. My power is life energy. It's nothing energy. Where it exists, life cannot. They are mutually exclusive. Can you destroy it? Yamamoto demanded. I don't know if it can be destroyed, Naruto admitted honestly. But I think I can stop it. That was enough. For a man who had just watched his most powerful captain's abilities fail utterly, the words, I think I can stop it, were a lifeline. Captain Unohana, Yamamoto ordered, turning to her. You will accompany him. Your Kaido is the closest analog we have to his power. Observe him. Assist him if possible. Your medical knowledge may yet find a weakness we have overlooked. Hiraku, Yukataki, you will provide support. Your objective is to keep any and all other threats away from Uzumaki while he works. He is to be given a clear field. Protect him at all costs. The order was staggering in its implications. In the space of an afternoon, Naruto had gone from prisoner to the Seraite's most valuable strategic asset. Hiraku tipped his hat, his expression unreadable. Well, this just got a whole lot more interesting. Let's try not to get erased. Jashiro. Yukataki gave a weak, wheezing cough, but his eyes were firm. Of course. Unohana gave a single, formal nod. Understood, head captain. Go, Yamamoto commanded, stepping aside. The massive gates of the Senkaimon groaned open, revealing the shimmering, unstable passage to the Rukongai. Unohana, Hiraku, and Yukataki stepped through. Naruto paused for a moment at the threshold. He looked back at the old commander. The man you call Kenpachi, Naruto said. He's not wounded. He's just full. He tried to drain an ocean with his thirst. Let him rest. He'll be fine. Yamamoto just grunted, a flicker of surprise in his ancient eye at the diagnosis. Naruto then turned and stepped into the gate, vanishing into the whirling vortex. The 78th district of the Rukongai, Anabi, was one of the poorest and most desolate. It was a sprawling slum of makeshift shacks and muddy streets, home to souls too weak or too lost to try for a better life. Now, it was a ghost town. The air was unnaturally silent, the usual cacophony of life replaced by a blanket of fear. Hay emerged into a street littered with abandoned carts and blowing refuse. A quarter-mile ahead, the world was wrong. It was a patch of creeping, shifting blackness, roughly the height of a two-story building. It wasn't dark like a shadow. It was dark like a hole in the universe. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, with two arm-like appendages and a head, but it had no features. It was a silhouette cut out of reality itself. Where it passed, the ground, the flimsy buildings, the very air ceased to be. It left a trail of perfectly smooth, featureless nothingness in its wake. It moved with a slow, ponderous gait, and with every step, another piece of the world was unwritten from existence. Surrounding it, at a safe distance, was a perimeter of white houried figures. Hitsugaya was in the air, his ice wings beating slowly, his face a mask of frustration. Byakuya stood on a distant rooftop, his hand on his blade, his posture rigid with contained fury. They and their divisions had it surrounded. But it was like surrounding a spreading puddle of acid. They could do nothing to stop its advance. My word, Shunsui murmured, his usual easygoing nature completely gone. It's worse up close. It feels disgusting. Yukataki was already coughing, the sheer anti-life pressure of the thing aggravating his chronic illness. Naruto's eyes were locked on the creature. He could feel it now, clear as day. It was a vortex, a drain pulling all the life energy around it into a singularity of oblivion. He could feel the faint, terrified sparks of souls hiding in the nearby buildings, and he could feel the creature's cold, mindless hunger for them. It's a Vanth, Unohana said suddenly, her voice a low, clinical whisper. Naruto turned to her, surprised. In ancient, forgotten texts, there are references to conceptual beings. She explained, her eyes narrowed in intense analysis. Vanths were said to be psychopomps of a different order, guides not to the afterlife, but to absolute oblivion. They were considered myths, personifications of the fear of non-existence. Looks like the myth is real, Kiraku grunted, drawing his twin blades. So, what's the plan, Goldie? The plan is, you three stay back, Naruto said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. Keep anyone else from getting close. And don't, under any circumstances, touch it. He began to walk forward, his pace steady and deliberate, straight toward the walking void. Naruto-san, Unohana called out, a genuine note of concern in her voice. He stopped and looked back at her. A small, confident smile touched his lips. She was the smile of the boy who had faced down gods and monsters, now tempered by the power of the man he had become. It's okay. This is my fight. I know what to do. With that, he turned and continued his advance. The creature, which had been moving slowly toward a block of shacks where a cluster of terrified souls were hiding, seemed to sense him. The silhouette of its head turned. It had no eyes, but Naruto felt its attention. Its focus, lock onto him. It was the feeling of a predator spotting a much larger, more interesting meal. It changed direction, now shambling directly toward Naruto. He stopped 50 feet away. The air between them was cold, dead. The very ground beneath his feet felt like it was going numb. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and centered himself. He ignored the frantic shouts of the Shinigami, the crushing pressure of the void. He reached deep inside himself, to the shoreless ocean of life that was his core. He opened his eyes. They were glowing, twin blue suns. His hair seemed to burn brighter, and the air around him shimmered with golden heat. A cloak of pure, vibrant chakra, brighter and more powerful than any nine-tails shroud he had ever manifested, erupted around him. It wasn't the violent, bubbling form of old. This was smooth, controlled, a perfect mantle of golden light that pushed back the oppressive cold of the Vanth. The creature hesitated for the first time. It felt the energy, a force diametrically, fundamentally opposed to its own nature. It was like a creature of absolute darkness encountering a supernova. Naruto raised his right hand, palm open. A sphere of swirling golden energy, dense and blindingly bright, formed above it. It looked like a miniature sun. But he didn't throw it. He held it, gathering more and more power into the sphere. The Vanth seemed to make a decision. Its arm of nothingness stretched, elongating at an impossible speed, lashing out like a black whip to erase this intolerable source of light. Naruto didn't move. He let it come. The tendril of void struck the golden aura surrounding him. It was not an explosion. It was a war of concepts. The point of contact sizzled. The nothingness tried to erase the life energy. The life energy tried to fill the nothingness. For a heart-stopping moment, they were at a stalemate. A small, gray, static-filled sphere formed where they met, a place where Stents and non-existence were locked in a screaming, silent battle. Then Naruto pushed. "You don't belong here," he roared, his voice echoing with power. The golden aura flared, and the miniature sun in his hand pulsed. The golden light began to overpower the black. The tendril of void didn't just retreat, it was being actively unmade, a process that was the reverse of its own. It was being forcibly filled with existence. The creature let out a silent, psychic scream of pain, a wave of pure agony that washed over all the spiritually aware beings present. It recoiled, its tendril snapping back to its main body, now shorter than it was before. Naruto had not just repelled it. He had wounded it. He had erased a piece of the eraser. All across the battlefield, the jaws of Captain Class Shinigami dropped. Byakuya Kuchiki, a man whose composure was the stuff of legend, felt his eyes widen. Toshiro Hitsugaya forgot to flap his wings for a moment and dipped in the air. This stranger wasn't just immune to the creature's power. He was its perfect, conceptual counter. Unohana watched, her heart pounding in her chest. She was witnessing a battle on a level she had only ever read about in forbidden texts. This was not a clash of swords or energy blasts. This was a primordial struggle between being and unbeing. Naruto didn't give the creature a chance to recover. He charged. He didn't use a jutsu. He didn't try to strike it. He did exactly what he had told Unohana he would do. He ran straight at the hole and prepared to fill it. He slammed into the Vanth's chest, a sun crashing into a black hole. The moment he made contact, he plunged his hands, now glowing with blinding golden light, deep into the creature's body of nothingness. The psychic scream of the Vanth was deafening, a shriek of pure, existential violation. From the outside, it was a terrifying spectacle. Naruto was half submerged in the creature of void, his lower body seemingly erased from existence. The golden aura around him was flickering violently, being eaten away at its edges by the voracious nothingness. Uzumaki, Shunsui shouted, taking a step forward before Yukitake put a hand on his arm to stop him. But Naruto was not being erased. He was pouring his very essence into the void. It was a battle of volume. The Vanth was a hole of a certain size. Naruto was an infinite ocean. He gritted his teeth, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. He opened the floodgates. A cataclysmic, silent explosion of golden light erupted from the center of the Vanth. It was not a blast that pushed outward, it was a bloom that filled inward. The black, featureless silhouette began to glow from within, cracks of gold spreading across its surface like fissures in obsidian. The Vanth thrashed, its form destabilizing. Chi was being force-fed a concept it could not process. It was a vacuum being filled with a substance of infinite density. It tried to dissolve Naruto, to erase him, but he was the anchor point, the source of its destruction. Holding it in place from the inside. Be full, Naruto bellowed, his voice distorted by the sheer power he was unleashing. With a final, silent, reality-bending implosion of light, the creature vanished. Not erased, but overridden. The blackness was gone. The void was gone. In its place stood Naruto, on his knees, panting heavily. The ground around him, once erased, was now restored. The buildings, the dirt, the air, it was all back, as if it had never been gone. But he was shaking. He looked at his hands. They were solid, whole. But he could feel a lingering, cold, a chill that went deeper than the bone. It was the memory of the touch. The feeling of absolute, final oblivion. He had stared into the abyss, and for a terrifying second, it had stared back. He had won, but it had cost him something. Not energy. His reserves were still an endless ocean. It had cost him a piece of his certainty. He now knew, truly knew, what the opposite of his existence felt like. And it terrified him. He looked up as Unohana Flash stepped to his side, her usual serene expression replaced with one of open, unguarded concern. She knelt before him, her eyes scanning him for injury. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft. He could only nod, his breathing still ragged. "It's cold," he managed to say, the words feeling inadequate. She reached out, her hand hovering over his shoulder, as if she were afraid to touch him, afraid that some of the nothingness might still cling to him. He could see in her eyes a torrent of questions, a professional's need to understand warring with a simple, human concern. He had just saved a district, possibly the entire Soul Society, from a threat they could not even scratch. He had proven himself to be not just a healer, but a warrior of conceptual, cosmic power. But as he knelt there, shivering from a cold that no fire could warm, he had never felt more like a lost and frightened boy. He looked into her dark, worried eyes, and in them, he found a strange sort of anchor in the terrifying, alien world he had fallen into. She didn't understand his power, not really. But she was the only one who seemed to be trying. The only one who saw the being wielding the power. Not just the power itself. The shared danger, the glimpse into a threat that existed beyond their understanding, had forged a new, unspoken intimacy between them. He had shown her the full scale of his power. And she was the only one to see the price it had exacted on his soul. In the distance, from a high tower in the Seraite, a lone, conservative elder O.F. the now defunct Central 46 watched the golden light fade through a scrying glass. He had seen it all. He had seen the godlike power of the stranger, and it filled him not with relief, but with a deep, ideological terror. Such power was an imbalance, an affront to the natural order. He turned from the glass and walked to a hidden bookshelf. He pressed a secret switch, and a section of the wall slid away, revealing a dark, dusty chamber. In the center of the chamber, on a stone pedestal, lay a single, ancient scroll bound in human skin. He unrolled it. The text was archaic, written in a language that hadn't been spoken in millennia. But he had spent his life studying such forbidden lore. His eyes found the passage he was looking for. It spoke of cosmic balance, of the error of creation, and of a great, primordial entity that sought to correct it. An entity that could unmake that which should not be. His finger traced the name, whispering it like a prayer. The eschaton, he breathed. The weaver of ends. He looked back at the scrying glass, at the image of the golden-haired boy who could command life itself. An imbalance has occurred, the elder whispered to the empty room. A god has been born where none should be. The loom is tangled. A correction is required. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Scars of the Past, Promises for the Future. The aftermath of the Vanth incident. Fundame. Entirely altered Naruto's status in the Seraite. He was no longer a guest, a prisoner, or an anomaly. He was a weapon, a deterrent. The captains and their subordinates now looked at him with a new kind of awe. A fearful respect reserved for something that could single-handedly solve a problem they couldn't even scratch. The whispers that followed him were no longer just about his healing, they were about the silent, golden explosion that had overridden a piece of the void. The change did little to comfort him. The victory had left a chill in his soul, a deep, resonant memory of the absolute nothingness he had touched. It was a loneliness that went deeper than his dimensional displacement. It was the loneliness of a singular existence, of being the only thing of his kind. He spent more time in the quiet solitude of Unohana's garden, the vibrant life of the plum tree a small comfort against the cold echo in his mind. Unohana, for her part, had also changed. Her professional curiosity had been sated in the most spectacular way possible. Now, it was replaced by something far more personal. She had seen him at his most powerful, and she had been the only one to see the cracks in his composure afterward. She saw the boy beneath the god, and it was that boy, shivering from a conceptual cold, that now occupied her thoughts. She found him by the koi pond, staring at his own reflection in the water. The sun was high, but he seemed to carry his own shadows. The chill has not faded, she stated. It was not a question. Naruto didn't look up. It's not in my body. It's in my head. A memory, like remembering the taste of something rotten. An encounter with a conceptual absolute will do that, she said, her voice soft. She came and sat on the grass beside him, foregoing the usual formality of the veranda. You felt the antithesis of your own being. It is only natural that it would leave a mark. Is that the master healer talking, or the captain? He asked, a hint of his old self, a bit of challenge, in his tone. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Perhaps neither. Perhaps it is simply Retsu Unohana. The use of her given name was a deliberate, calculated step across a line of professional distance. It was an invitation. Naruto finally turned to look at her. Why aren't you afraid of me? Everyone else is. After what happened with Kenpachi, and now T.S., they look at me like I'm a bomb that might go off. They are soldiers, she replied simply. They see power as a weapon, and they are trying to gauge the size of yours. They are afraid because they cannot measure it. I am a healer. I see power as a tool. And I have never seen a tool of such magnificent potential. It is not fear I feel, Naruto-san. It is fascination. She paused, her gaze turning inward. And perhaps, recognition. The burden of holding a power that sets you apart from everyone else. That is a feeling I am familiar with. There it was again. That hint of a deeper history, he shadow of the ancient blade she kept so carefully sheathed. He had felt it on the battlefield, and he felt it now. A vast, cold, sharp power hidden beneath layers of warmth and grace. You're not just a healer, are you? He asked, his voice quiet. Unohana's placid smile was her only answer. She stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. There is something I wish to show you. Something that may help you understand the nature of power in this world, and the burdens that come with it. Will you accompany me? He hesitated for only a moment before nodding and rising to his feet. He was tired of sitting, tired of the cold echo in his mind, and he was intensely curious about the secret she was hinting at. She led him not through the bustling corridors of the Seraite, but to a quiet, unis summing structure deep within the First Division's domain. It was a simple, stark building with a single, massive door sealed by a complex array of Kido spells. Two hulking, silent guards stood watch, their faces hidden by masks. They bowed deeply to Unohana and stood aside, allowing her to approach the door. She placed her hand on the seal. By order of the captain of the 4th Division, Retsu Unohana. Open. The seals glowed and dissolved. The massive door swung inward with a groan that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth, revealing a dark, descending staircase. A wave of immense, suffocating spiritual pressure rolled out. A multi-layered miasma of despair, madness, and unimaginable power. Where are we? Naruto asked, the sheer density of the Retsu a physical weight. The low, saint level of the central great underground prison, Unohana said, her voice grim. Mugen. The infinite prison. She led him down the stairs, into the oppressive darkness. The prison was not made of cells and bars. It was simply an endless, featureless black space. There was no up or down, no walls to be seen. The prisoners were bound by Kido, suspended in an infinite void, sensory deprivation their cage. Unohana stopped. In the distance, Naruto could see a single figure, bound head to toe in black straps, suspended in the void. Even through the bindings and the seals, the spiritual pressure rolling off the figure was monstrous. It was cold, arrogant, and intelligent. He recognized it from the battlefield. It was the residue of the manipulative, spider web power he had felt. Sosuke Aizen, Unohana said, her voice a low murmur. A former captain. A man who sought to unseat the Soul King and take his place. He achieved a state of transcendence, a level of power close to that of a god. He was defeated, and this is his reward. An eternity of solitude in the darkness. Naruto stared at the bound figure. He could feel the prisoner's mind, a raging torrent of intellect and pride, still churning, still plotting. Even in this state, he wanted to be a god. He wanted to fill a vacant throne, Unohana corrected. He believed that the world needed a ruler, a single, absolute will to guide it. His methods were monstrous, but his ambition was born from a perceived flaw in the very structure of our reality. She turned to Naruto, her eyes dark and serious in the gloom. I brought you here to see this. To show you what happens to those who let their power corrupt their purpose. Aizen sought power for the sake of dominion. You have a power greater than any he ever achieved, and you seem to have no ambition at all. In the eyes of many here, that makes you even more dangerous. They cannot understand a god who does not wish to rule. He looked from the bound Aizen to Unohana. Is that why you brought me here? As a warning? No, she said softly. I brought you here as a confession. Her words hung in the oppressive silence of Mugen. She turned and began walking back toward the staircase. There is one more place we must go. She led him out of the prison and, using a secluded and unmarked senkaimon, they traveled. The destination was not a district in the Rukongai or a location in the human world. It was a place outside of normal space, a pocket dimension accessible only by a select few. It was a vast, desolate plain of black rock under a perpetually gray sky. The air was thin and sharp. In the center of the plain stood a single, weathered stone dais. The ground for 100 yards in every direction was not just scarred, it was annihilated, pulverized into fine dust. Testament to battles of unimaginable ferocity. This is a place of judgment, Unohana said, her voice quiet, stripped of its usual serene melody. It was raw, real. A place where certain disputes are settled. Where sins are paid for. She walked to the center of the dais, her black hair stark against the pale gray of the sky. She turned to face him, and for the first time, the placid, gentle smile was completely gone. Her face was a mask of profound, ancient sorrow. You asked me if I was afraid of you, she said. I am not, because there is nothing you can do, no power you can unleash. That is more monstrous than what I have already done myself. She reached up to the collar of her shihakusho. With a slow, deliberate movement, she pulled her thick braid from over her chest, revealing her neck and the top of her sternum. There, just below her clavicle, was a thin, dark scar. It was old, faded, but unmistakable. A sword wound, one that had been meant to kill. Naruto's eyes, capable of seeing the flow of life itself, focused on the scar. He could see the tangled, damaged spiritual pathways beneath the skin, the ghost of a wound so deep and so grievous that even her own master. Full healing had not been able to erase it completely. It was a permanent mark of her mortality, a flaw in her perfection. You asked me what I am, she continued, her voice a low whisper. You are correct, I am not just a healer. The art of the sword is the art of killing. To master healing, one must first have an absolute, intimate understanding of every possible way a body can be broken. Every way a life can be ended. She took a deep breath, the confession she had held for a millennium finally rising to her lips. The title, Kenpachi, is given to the strongest Shinigami of their generation. The one who has killed the most, who has fought the most, who lives for the thrill of the blade. She said, her voice dropping to a near inaudible hush, her eyes locking with his, am the first Kenpachi. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The serene captain, the master healer, the symbol of life and restoration in the Gote 13, was the original embodiment of its bloodlust. The greatest killer in its history. My name was not always Retsu, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It was Yakiru Unohana, the most heinous criminal the Soul Society had ever known. I mastered every style of swordsmanship in existence, and then I created my own. I wandered the lands, seeking only strong opponents to fight and kill. There was no joy for me but in the swing of the blade. In the spray of blood. I was not a soldier. I was a monster who reveled in slaughter. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the desolate horizon. This scar, she touched it gently. This was given to me by the only person I ever fought who was stronger than me. A child. A boy who fought like a demon, who lived only for the battle, just as I did. In fighting him, I realized I had found someone who could succeed me. Someone who could inherit my sin. And in that moment, I crippled myself. I sealed away my own nature, my own power, so that he could one day grow strong enough to kill me. I learned the art of healing not to save others, but to prolong my fights, to savor the dance of death. I became Retsu Unohana to atone for the sins of Yakiru Unohana. She fell silent, weight of her confession hanging in the cold, dead air. She had just laid her soul bare, exposing the blood and darkness she had kept hidden for 1,000 years. She had shown him the monster she truly was. The antithesis of the image she projected. She had done it because his simple, honest power had held up a mirror to her own complex, blood-soaked existence, and she could no longer bear the hypocrisy. She needed him, the god of life, to know the truth of the master of death. Naruto listened, his expression unreadable. He had seen loneliness, pain, and hatred in his life. He had fought me, and who believed themselves gods and monsters who were victims. But he had never encountered a story like this. A sorrow this deep, a burden carried for so long. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them until he stood directly before her on the stone dais. He didn't speak. He didn't offer platitudes or judgment. He reached out his hand. Unohana flinched slightly, a rare, involuntary reaction. She expected him to recoil, to look at her with the disgust she felt for herself. But his hand did not stop. He gently, reverently, touched his fingertips to the scar on her chest. It was not the touch of a god intending to heal. It was the touch of a man intending to understand. A wave of warmth spread from his fingers, but it wasn't the overwhelming flood of life he had used on Kenpachi. It was a soft, gentle empathy. He wasn't trying to erase the scar. He was feeling its shape, its history, its pain. He was acknowledging the wound, not just on her skin, but on her soul. I see, he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. He then shared his own scars. Not with words, but with a feeling. He let the warmth from his hand carry a memory, a sliver of his own soul. He let her feel it, the crushing, suffocating loneliness of a child hated by his entire village. The sting of the word, monster, whispered behind his back. The desperate, aching need for acknowledgement. The pain of seeing his friends hurt. Of carrying the weight of their hopes on his shoulders. He showed her the darkness he had faced. Not from his enemies, but from within himself, the temptation of the Kyuubi's hatred. The despair after Jiraiya's death, the burden of being a prophesied savior. It was a confession for a confession. He was showing her that he, too, was scarred. That his son Dren, shed power was born from the deepest shadows. Unohana gasped, her eyes wide. She felt it all in an instant, a lifetime of pain and struggle that mirrored her own in its sheer weight. He was not a naive god who had been born into power. He was a boy who had clawed his way out of hell, and in doing so, had become something divine. His fingers were still on her scar. Her hand, on its own accord, came up and covered his. Their hands, his radiating a gentle warmth, hers cool and steady, rested together over the mark of her greatest sin and his greatest point of understanding. The professional respect, the intellectual fascination, the burgeoning admiration, they all coalesced in that single moment of shared, profound vulnerability. It blossomed into something new, something real, and deep, and undeniable. It was not a romance born of flirtation or circumstance. It was a connection forged in the crucible of their respective hells. A god of life and a master of death, finding solace not in their strengths, but in their shared scars. Naruto's thumb gently stroked the skin next to her scar. "Yakiru," he said, his voice a soft murmur. He wasn't speaking to the captain. He was speaking to the woman who had just confessed her soul to him. "Retsu, you've carried that long enough." Her breath hitched. A single, crystalline tear, the first she had shed in 1,000 years, traced a path down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. In the silent, desolate landscape, under the ever-gray sky, two beings of immense, lonely power stood together, hands intertwined over an ancient wound, and for the first time in a very long time. Neither of them felt truly alone. The chill in Naruto's soul, the memory of the void, seemed to recede, pushed back not by a show of power, but by a simple, human connection. And the weight of a millennium of sin on Unohana's shoulders felt, for the first time, just a little bit lighter. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Echoes from Another World. The moment of quiet intimacy on that desolate plain had changed everything. The space between Naruto and Unohana was now charged with an unspoken truth. The professional distance was gone, replaced by a comfortable, profound familiarity. They returned to the Seraite not as captain and guest, but as two confederates bound by shared secrets. Unohana's smile, once a placid mask, now held a genuine warmth when directed at him. Naruto, in turn, found the vast, lonely silence in his own mind filled with the steady, reassuring presence of her existence. The cold touch of the vast nothingness still lingered, but it was now a distant echo. Not a constant shiver. Their routine continued, but its nature shifted. Their conversations in the garden were no longer philosophical debates, they were personal. She spoke of the Gote 13's early days, of the brutal, primal world that had forged them, her words painting a picture of the history that lived behind her eyes. He, in turn, spoke of his friends, of Team 7, of the bonds that had been the anchor of his entire life. He described Sasuke's intensity, Sakura's fiery spirit, Kakashi's lazy genius. He spoke of them with a fondness that was so deep it was almost painful. A love for a world he was no longer a part of. Unohana listened, her sharp mind piecing together the man he was from the stories he told. He was not just a vessel of immense power, he was a focal point of connections. A nexus of bonds that had defined his world. It was this, she realized, that was the true source of his strength. His power over life was not just a cosmic accident, it was the ultimate expression of his desire to protect and preserve the bonds he cherished. This fragile piece was destined to be shattered. It happened without warning. Naruto was sitting on the veranda, watching Unohana practice a complex Kido spell in the garden, a beautiful, intricate weaving of light designed to purify toxins. He wasn't watching the spell itself, but the perfect, practiced grace of her movements. Suddenly, he froze. A feeling washed over him, something he hadn't felt since his arrival. It was a faint, familiar tug. A specific resonance in the fabric of reality. It tasted of ozone, ink, and the unique chakra signature of his home world. "What is it?" Unohana asked, her spell dissolving as she saw the look on his face. "Something's coming," Naruto murmured, his eyes wide as he looked at the sky. "Something from home." At that exact moment, in the center of the Seraite, the air began to warp. It shimmered like a heat haze, then twisted, folding in on itself. A chorus of alarms blared across the fortress city. Captains and their lieutenants converged on the scene, weapons drawn, assuming it was another attack. The distortion intensified, and then, with a sound like tearing silk, a hole opened in reality. It was not the jagged, violent tear that had brought Naruto here, nor the featureless maw of a garganta. This was a perfect, intricate circle, its edges defined by a glowing, complex matrix of seals and kanji that pulsed with a pale blue light. It was a seal formula, a work of artful, desperate genius. From the portal, 3 figures stumbled out, collapsing onto the pristine white ground of the Seraite. Gasping for air, the portal snapped shut behind them with a final, definitive pop. The assembled Shinigami stared, their guards up. The arrivals were not spirits. They were human, dressed in strange, practical clothing. Flak jackets, fingerless gloves, headbands bearing a stylized leaf. Their energy felt different, a vibrant, earthy power that was fundamentally distinct from Retsu. It was chakra. Naruto and Unohana arrived in a flicker of movement. Naruto skidded to a halt, his heart slamming against his ribs. He knew them. He knew their energy signatures as well as he knew his own. The first was a tall man with silver hair that defied gravity, his face half hidden by a mask. Kakashi Hatake. The second was a woman with vibrant pink hair, her green eyes wide with shock and exhaustion. Sakura Haruno. The third, his face a mask of grim determination, was a man with his hair tied in a spiky ponytail. Shikamaru Nara. They looked older, not by much, perhaps a year or two. But the time was etched on their faces. They looked weary, hunted, and desperate. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura-chan. Shikamaru. Naruto breathed, the names feeling strange and foreign on his tongue. Their heads snapped up. Their eyes widened in disbelief. Naruto. Sakura whispered, her voice cracking. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. Is that really you? He looked different. He was dressed in the black robes of a Shinigami, a courtesy uniform Unohana had procured for him. He carried himself with a quiet, immense stillness that was a world away from the boisterous boy she knew. But the blonde hair, the whisker marks, and those impossibly blue eyes, it was him. Before anyone could move, before the captains could issue a challenge, Sakura closed the distance and threw her arms around him. Burying her face in his chest, a choked sob escaped her. You're alive. Oh, gods, you're alive. Naruto froze for a moment, stunned by the physical contact, BEF. Or his own arms came up and wrapped around her. He could feel her frantic, relieved heartbeat. He closed his eyes, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled his knees washing over him. The connection, the bond he thought was severed forever, was here. Real, tangible. Kakashi and Shikamaru got to their feet, their expressions a mixture of relief and profound shock. Kakashi's visible eye roamed over Naruto, taking in the subtle but absolute transformation. Shikamaru's sharp, analytical gaze swept the area, cataloging the dozens of powerful, sword-wielding figures surrounding them, the strange architecture. The alien spiritual pressure in the air. What a drag, Shikamaru muttered, though his eyes were fixed on Naruto with undisguised relief. Of all the dimensions in all the multiverses, we actually found you. The reunion was cut short as head captain Yamamoto stepped forward, the heat radiating from him silencing all chatter. Who are you? He demanded, his voice a low rumble. Quote, how did you breach the barriers of the Seraite? Kakashi, ever the diplomat, stepped in front of his comrades, his posture non-threatening but his senses on high alert. My name is Kakashi Hatake. We mean you no harm. We came seeking our friend. He nodded toward Naruto. This is not a place one simply visits, Byakuya stated coolly from the sidelines. Your method of entry was a violation. Quote, it was a one-time use seal matrix left behind by the Sage of Six Paths himself, Shikamaru explained, his mind already working, analyzing the power dynamics of the room. Designed to home in on the IQ signature of the combined tailed beast chakra. In other words, him. He pointed at Naruto. It was a shot in the dark. A desperate one. Desperate? Unohana asked, her gaze soft but penetrating as she looked at the newcomers. She could see the exhaustion etched into them, the strain of a long and difficult journey. It was Sakura who answered, pulling away from Naruto but keeping a hand on his arm. As if afraid he might vanish again. After you disappeared, Naruto, things were stable for a while. The alliance held. We were rebuilding. But you weren't just the hero of the war. You were the linchpin, the pillar. Your presence was the nexus that kept the tailed beasts synchronized and stable. Her expression grew grim. Without you, that connection began to fray. Over the past year, it's gotten worse. The Biju are desynchronizing. Their energy is becoming unstable. Kurama, he's trying to hold them together, but without you as the anchor, he's losing the fight. They're starting to revert to what they were before. Mindless forces of destruction. Shukaku has already broken free and buried half the land of wind and sand. We've managed to contain him, but it's only a matter of time before the others follow. The world is on the brink of an apocalypse caused by the very power that saved it. The weight of her words fell on Naruto like a physical blow. He had thought that by leaving, the world would be at peace. He had never considered that his very existence had become so integral to its balance that his absence would doom it. The seal was our last hope, Kakashi added, his voice low. Hagoromo left it as the ultimate failsafe, a way to recall the Nexus if it was ever displaced. We came here to ask you, Naruto, no, to beg you. Please, you have to come home. The demand hung in the air, an impossible choice. Home. The word echoed in Naruto's mind. Konoha, Ichiraku Ramen, his friends, the life he had fought and bled for. It was all there, just a portal away. But then his eyes found Unohana. She stood slightly apart from the other captains, her expression unreadable. But he could feel her. He could feel the sudden, quiet tension in her, the bracing of her soul. She had just found someone who understood the burden of her past. He had just found an anchor in this strange new reality. Their story, a delicate, beautiful thing, had only just begun to be written. Go home and save his world. Stay and embrace his new life, his new love. He was being torn in two. This is a Gote 13 internal matter, Byakuya said, stepping forward. These intruders and their request must be deliberated upon. No, Naruto said, his voice quiet but absolute. It cut through all other conversation. He looked at Kakashi, at Sakura, at the hope and desperation in their eyes. Then he looked at Unohana, at the universe of unspoken understanding that now existed between them. He felt like his heart was being ripped from his chest. The old Naruto would have jumped at the chance to go home without a second thought. But he was not the old Naruto. He was a god who had touched oblivion, a man who had shared his deepest scars with the only other person in existence who could understand them. I can't go back, he said. The words costing him more than any physical battle ever had. Sakura's face fell. Naruto, you don't understand. I do, he interrupted, his voice gaining strength. I understand perfectly, but I am not who I was. The power that holds the Biju together, it isn't just a part of me anymore. It is me. If I return, the being that I am now, my very presence would warp our world. The life energy I radiate is too dense, too potent. The elemental nations operate on chakra. My existence there would be like putting a sun in a greenhouse. I would overwhelm it. I would unbalance it in a different, more catastrophic way. Shikamaru's sharp mind immediately grasped the terrifying implications. A spontaneous generation of life. Uncontrolled growth. You'd be a walking, talking ecological disaster. What a drag. Quote, so that's it, Sakura cried, her voice filled with despair. We're just doomed. Naruto looked at her, his heart aching at her pain. No, he said, I can't go back, but that doesn't mean I can't help. He turned to Unohana, a silent question in his eyes. He needed a place of absolute quiet. A place where he would not be disturbed. She understood instantly. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Everyone, stand back, Naruto commanded, his voice taking on the same authority it had held when he faced the Vanth. The assembled captains, recognizing the tone, instinctively obeyed. Even Yamamoto watched with silent, intense curiosity. Naruto closed his eyes. He took a deep breath and sank into a meditative state, kneeling on the ground. He reached out, not with his senses, but with the core of his being. He ignored the spiritual energy of the soul society. He ignored the dimensions in between. He cast a line of pure life force across the void, aiming for the faint, familiar echo of his home. He found it. He felt the frantic, chaotic energies of the 9 Biju, a symphony played by 9 different orchestras at once. And he felt Kurama, his oldest friend, a desperate, roaring presence trying to conduct them all, and failing. Kurama, Naruto projected, not with words, but with pure thought, a wave of familiar, calming energy. I'm here. The chaotic energies faltered. A single, powerful, astonished consciousness focused on his projection. Naruto, is that you? Where are you? It's a long story, Naruto sent back. Listen to me, I can't come back, but I can fix this. He began to pour his energy across the dimensional divide. It was not a simple transfer. It was an act of incredible, intricate creation. He wasn't just sending power. He was weaving a new network. A new nexus. He was creating a self-sustaining matrix of his own life energy, a spiritual construct that would exist within the Biju's collective soulscape, a permanent echo of his own role as their meeting place. He was building a new pillar to replace the one that had been lost. The effort was immense. From the outside, a brilliant, golden aura erupted around Naruto. so intense it was difficult to look at. The ground around him began to sprout lush, green grass. Flowers bloomed and withered in seconds, a rapid-fire display of life being supercharged. Unohana stood closest, her hands tucked in her sleeves, acting as a silent guardian. She could feel the staggering amount of power he was projecting. It was not the violent flood he had used on Kenpachi, nor focused blade he had used on the Vanth. This was an act of delicate, complex artistry on a cosmic scale. He was performing surgery on the soul of a world from a dimension away. She watched his face, beaded with sweat, his expression one of intense concentration. She saw the strain, she saw the cost. Even for an ocean, draining a river was a noticeable act. She saw his new, godlike power had limits. Not of capacity, but of application. This was costing him. It was draining him in a way no physical fight could. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the golden aura receded. Naruto slumped forward, catching himself with his hands, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was pale, drained. He looked up at his friends, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. It's done. I created a new nexus. A self-sustaining focal point. It will keep them in balance. It will hold. Kakashi, his senses sharp, could already feel the change. The faint, chaotic vibrations he had grown accustomed to feeling from his world had smoothed out, settling into a calm, steady hum. He looked at Naruto, not just as his former student, but as a being of truly staggering power and will. Naruto, he began, but he had no words. You saved us, Sakura whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. Again, Naruto pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. Unohana was instantly at his side, her hand on his arm, steadying him. He leaned on her, grateful for the support. The impossible choice had been met with an impossible solution. He had saved his world without abandoning his new one. But the display had not gone unnoticed. The captains were staring, their minds reeling. He had just projected his power across dimensions and stabilized a world. The scale of it was beyond comprehension. And in a dark, hidden room in the Seraite, the traitorous elder watched through his scrying glass, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. The god boy was weakened, drained from his interdimensional feat of strength. He had expended a great deal of his power, leaving himself vulnerable. The sun has dimmed itself, the elder whispered, rolling up the ancient scroll. The time for correction is now. The weaver of ends requires a clear field to work his loom. He turned to a series of pre-drawn seals on the floor of his chamber, seals that were connected to dozens of others hidden throughout the Seraite. They were not designed to attack with Kido or Retsu. They were designed to do something far more insidious. They were designed to resonate with the energy of the void, the power of the Vanth, which he had secretly managed to capture a sliver of. They were designed to create a field of absolute nothingness, a field that would choke a god of life, severing him from his power source. This was his chance. The perfect moment to strike. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Serpent in the Garden. The relief that washed over the assembled group was palpable, a collective exhalation after a crisis averted. Sakura was weeping openly, a messy, cathartic flood of tears. Kakashi's visible eye was crinkled in a smile of profound pride and relief. Even Shikamaru, ever the stoic, had a genuine, unforced smile on his face. They had their miracle. Naruto, leaning on Unohana, felt a wave of dizziness. The interdimensional feat had taken more out of him than he'd anticipated. It was a deep, cellular exhaustion. A feeling of being stretched thin across the cosmos. Unohana's presence was a solid, warm anchor in his spinning world. Her hand on his arm was firm, her spiritual pressure a calm, steadying essence that shielded him from the prying, awestruck stares of the other captains. You are drained, she murmured, her voice for his ears alone. You pushed your new nature to a limit you had not yet tested. It worked, though, he said, his voice raspy. They're safe. That was all that mattered. Head Captain Yamamoto, who had observed the entire spectacle with grim silence, finally moved. He stepped forward, his cane thumping on the ground. His gaze was fixed on Naruto, and for the first time, it held something beyond calculation or suspicion. It held a measure of grudging respect. Your friends are a complication, Yamamoto stated, his voice a low rumble. But your actions have demonstrated a power and a willingness to protect that cannot be ignored. The Gote 13 owes you a debt. It was a staggering admission from the ancient commander. They must be returned to their world, Yamamoto continued. The instability they represent cannot be allowed to remain. The portal is gone, Shikamaru pointed out. Ever the pragmatist. The seal was a one-way, one-use construct. We have no way to get back. That is your problem, not ours, Byakuya Kuchiki interjected, his voice cold. However, given the circumstances, I propose they be placed in custody until the Department of Research and Development can devise a solution. Oh, no you don't. Sakura snapped, her relief instantly replaced by fiery indignation. We're not going to be lab rats for your creepy science division. Mayuri Kuretsuchi let out a soft, delighted chuckle. Oh, but the data you could provide. Living beings sustained by a different form of energy. The opportunity is simply delicious. Before the argument could escalate, a sudden, jarring wrongness slammed into the seraite. It was not a spiritual pressure. It was the opposite. It was a wave of absolute cold, a pulse of pure negation that washed over the entire fortress city. For a fraction of a second, every Shinigami felt their connection to their own Retsu flicker. As if a switch had been thrown. The air grew still, the background hum of spiritual energy that was the constant soundtrack of the Soul Society vanishing into an unnerving silence. Naruto gasped, stumbling. The feeling was hideously familiar. It was the touch of the Vanth, magnified 1,000-fold. The deep, lingering chill in his soul flared into an agonizing, freezing burn. His own vast ocean of life energy, which a moment ago was simply depleted, now felt, choked. Constricted. He felt a metaphysical hand closing around his throat. What is this? Hiraku murmured, his hand instinctively going to his blades. Across the seraite, hidden seals flared to life. They were etched onto the underside of bridges, behind loose stones in the great walls, on the support beams of the barracks. There were dozens of them, all connected, all pulsing with a sickly, gray light. They were not emitting energy. They were absorbing it. They were creating a network, a cage of nothingness. And its nexus was centered directly on the courtyard where the captains were assembled. In his hidden chamber, the rogue elder, Omikami Koin, stood in the center of his master array, pouring his own Ryutsu into the seals. His face was a mask of zealous fury. The correction begins, he hissed. The effect on Naruto was immediate and catastrophic. He cried out, not in pain, but in a sudden, terrifying weakness. The golden aura that always clung to him, a passive manifestation of his power, sputtered and died. The vibrant, overwhelming life force that defined his very being was being smothered, cut off at its source. It felt as if his lungs were collapsing, as if his heart was being squeezed by an icy fist. He fell to his knees, his connection to the infinite ocean of life within him severed. He was no longer a god. He was just a man, a tired, drained man, trapped in a bubble of absolute anti-existence. Naruto! Sakura screamed, rushing to his side. Unohana was already there, her hands glowing with green Kaido energy. She pressed her palms to his back, trying to force her own spiritual power into him, but it was like pouring water onto a hydrophobic surface. Her healing energy simply slid off him, unable to penetrate the field of negation that now clung to him like a shroud. It's no use, she said, her voice tight with a frustration and fear she hadn't felt in centuries. Quote, something is isolating him from all spiritual energy, including his own. At that moment, they appeared. A dozen figures in the stark white robes of the Central 46 Judiciary, their faces hidden by ceremonial masks. They flickered into existence around the courtyard, surrounding the captains. And in their center, standing over Naruto with a look of cold triumph, was Omikami Koin. He had shed his elder's robes for the same white uniform. But his face was bare, his eyes burning with fanatical light. Elder Koin, Yamamoto roared, his voice shaking with fury. What is the meaning of this? This is treason. It is not treason. Commander, Koin said, his voice ringing with self-righteous conviction. It is salvation. You were all blinded by his power, seduced by his miracles. You failed to see the truth. This being is an aberration. A cancer on the great order of existence. His power of absolute life is an affront to the sacred cycle of death and rebirth. He is an imbalance that threatens to unravel the very fabric of reality. Quote. He pointed a trembling finger at Naruto, who was now struggling just to breathe. I am merely correcting it. The Weaver of Ends, the great eschaton, has granted me the means. This field of nullity severs him from the source of his divine corruption. It makes him mortal. It makes him weak. You are a fool. Shunsui spat, his blades already drawn. You've lied yourself with a power you can't possibly comprehend. I comprehend it perfectly, Coin retorted. It is the power of the end. The power of true order. And it is a power you are all about to witness. He raised his hand. Eliminate the anomaly. The rest of you stand down, or you will be judged as co-conspirators in his divine heresy. The 12 masked figures drew their Zanpakuto. They were not captain class, but they were strong. Elite members of the old guard, fanatics loyal to Coin's traditionalist ideology. They moved as one, their blades aimed at the kneeling, helpless Naruto. Get away from him, Sakura shrieked, a green chakra aura flaring around her fists. She launched herself at the nearest attacker, her strength monstrous. Kakashi was a blur of motion, his kunai flashing as he engaged 2 more. Shikamaru, though hopelessly outmatched in terms of power, was already forming hand signs, his shadow stretching out to try and bind the legs of another. The Shinigami captains were not idle. Byukuyas, scatter, Senbon Sakura, filled the air with a storm of pink blades. Soifun flickered between enemies, her stinger flashing. Hitsugaya's ice dragons roared to life. But their targets were secondary. The fanatics' primary goal was Naruto. 3 of them broke through the chaos, their blades descending on him. They never reached him. A wall of crimson blood, thick and viscous, erupted from the ground, forming a shield that intercepted the 3 blades. The steel sizzled as it made contact, dissolving into smoke. The courtyard fell silent. All eyes, Shinigami and fanatic alike, turned to the source of the shield. Retsu Unohana stood before Naruto, her back to him, her posture a protective wall. The serene, gentle mask was gone, shattered. Her face was cast in shadow, her eyes hidden by the curtain of her hair. The air around her, once a calm lake, had become a swirling, bottomless abyss of spiritual pressure. It was a cold, sharp, ancient power, a killing intent so pure and so vast it made Kenpachi Zaraki's Ryutsu feel like a child's tantrum. Every captain froze. Soifun's hand trembled. Shunsui Kyoraku's eyes went wide with a dawning, horrified recognition. Byakuya took an involuntary step back. They had all felt hints of her true power before, but they had dismissed it. Now, unveiled, it was a suffocating, terrifying thing. It was the pressure of a predator at the absolute apex of the food chain. Omikami Coin stared, his fanatical confidence wavering for the first time. Captain Unohana, what is this? Unohana slowly raised her head, and the eyes she fixed on him were not the gentle, compassionate eyes of the 4th Division's captain. They were cold, dead, empty of all emotion save for a chilling, predatory focus. Her gentle smile was gone, replaced by a faint, cruel curve of her lips that was terrifying in its intimacy. You have made 2 mistakes, she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper that was somehow more frightening than any shout. First, you threatened the peace of my division. Second, you tried to harm him. She reached up and began to unbraid her hair. As the long, black strands fell loose around her shoulders, her spiritual pressure intensified. The killing intent becoming a physical force that made the very stones of the courtyard groan. She drew her Zanpakuto, Minazuki. Its form began to shift, the blade becoming thicker, greener. You speak of balance, of correction, she whispered, taking a slow step toward Coin and his fanatics. Allow me to teach you a lesson about the art of killing. Coin, bolstered by his faith in his new master, regained a sliver of his courage. You cannot stop us all, woman. Your Kaido is useless here. Unohana let out a soft, breathy laugh. It was the most horrifying sound any of them had ever heard. Who said anything about healing? She held her blade before her, its edge now dripping with a thick, green, acidic fluid. The air shimmered around her. The world seemed to darken. The sky above turning the color of a deep bruise. Bankai, she breathed, the word a lover's whisper and a killer's promise. The blade of her sword dissolved. It melted into a torrent of thick, dark red liquid that flowed and spread, covering the courtyard in a bubbling, steaming river of what looked like blood. The substance was hideously vital, pulsing with a life of its own. It was not the gentle, nurturing life of Naruto's power. It was a hungry, corrosive, acidic life. Minazuki. The name of her Bankai was the last thing many of the fanatics heard clearly. The river of blood rose up, forming tendrils, waves, and blades. It was an extension of her will, a sea of acid that could dissolve flesh, bone, and spiritual energy with equal ease. The serene captain in her white houri was gone. In her place stood a specter of death. Her black hair whipping in a non-existent wind, her eyes glowing with a cold, terrifying light. This was not Retsu Unohana, the healer. This was Yakiru Unohana, the first Kenpachi. Unleashed. Now, she said, her new, cruel smile spreading wider as she looked at the terrified fanatics. Let the lesson begin. A wave of acid blood, 10 feet high, surged forward. The fanatics scattered, but they were not fast enough. 2 were caught. They screamed, a high, thin sound that was cut short as the Bankai washed over them, dissolving them into nothing but a blood. Mist that was then reabsorbed into the greater whole. Naruto, on his knees, watched through a haze of weakness and pain. He saw the woman who had shared her scars with him transform into a beautiful, terrifying angel of death. He saw the monster she had confessed to being, and he felt no fear. He felt a fierce, protective pride. She was doing this for him. Sakura, Kakashi, and Shikamaru stared in horror and awe. This woman, who had seemed so gentle, was a monster on a scale they could barely comprehend. Coin, his face pale with terror, screamed, "She is the true monster. She must be purged." Heralds of the end, attack. The remaining 10 fanatics, their self-preservation warring with their fanaticism, charged. They unleashed a volley of Kido, spears of light, bolts of fire. Unohana simply raised a hand. A wall of blood rose to meet the attack, absorbing the Kido spells without a ripple. The energy was simply eaten. My Bankai does not just melt the flesh, she explained, her voice echoing in the courtyard. A teacher lecturing her students. It melts anything it touches. Your bodies, your swords, your pathetic Kido. It all becomes part of me. She was a blur. She didn't use Shunpo. She seemed to skate across the surface of her own bloody sea, appearing in the midst of the fanatics. Her bare hands were now her weapons. She plunged a hand into the chest of one, and he dissolved from the inside out. She swiped her fingers across the face of another, and his head melted like wax. It was not a fight. It was a harvest. The other captains watched, frozen in place, not by choice, but by the sheer, overwhelming pressure of her presence and the horror of what they were seeing. This was the true face of the original Gote 13. This was the power of the first and greatest Kenpachi. Omikami Coin, his followers dissolving into screams and mist around him, finally broke. He turned to run. A tendril of blood shot out from the sea at his feet, wrapping around his ankle. He fell, screaming, as the acid began to eat at his leg. Unohana walked toward him, her steps slow and deliberate, the sea of blood parting before her. She knelt beside him, her face inches from his, her cold, dead eyes boring into his soul. You wanted to correct an imbalance, she whispered, her voice a silken threat. But you yourself are an imbalance, Omikami Coin. A flaw. And I am very, very good at correcting flaws. She reached out, her fingers dripping with her Bankai's acid, and gently, almost lovingly, touched his forehead. He opened his mouth to scream, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out as he dissolved. His fanatical crusade ending in a puff of red mist. With her enemies eliminated, the river of blood receded, flowing back, reforming into her blade. The sky lightened. The oppressive, killing pressure vanished, replaced once more by the serene, controlled aura of the captain of the 4th Division. Her hair was still down, her face was still pale, but the gentle smile had returned. Though it now held a chilling new depth. She turned to Naruto, who was still on his knees, and knelt before him. The null field cage was beginning to flicker, its power source, Coin, now gone. Are you hurt? She asked, her voice once again soft, gentle, and full of concern, as if she hadn't just single-handedly committed a massacre. Naruto could only stare at her, at the monster and the angel, the killer and the healer. All contained within one magnificent, terrifying woman. He reached out a trembling hand and touched her cheek. You're beautiful, he breathed. And as the last of the null field cage dissolved and his own power began to trickle back into his veins, he fainted, his last sight the image of her face, her eyes widening in surprise, a faint blush dusting her cheeks. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A Trinity of Blades. The silence that followed Unohana's brutal display was heavier than any sound. It was a silence born of shock, fear, and a dawning, horrified understanding. The captains of the Gote 13, beings who considered themselves the pinnacle of power, had just been reduced to spectators. They had witnessed one of their own, a woman they thought they knew, unleash a power so primal and so absolute it had redrawn the boundaries of their world. The courtyard was a scene of carnage, yet strangely clean. The bodies of Coin's fanatics were gone, dissolved and absorbed. The only evidence of the battle was the faint, acrid smell of acid and the lingering, bone-deep killing intent that clung to the air like a shroud. Unohana knelt beside the unconscious Naruto, her hand resting on his chest. His breathing was steady, and she could feel the faint, stubborn flicker of his life force beginning to push back, to reassert itself now that the null field was gone. The river was no longer dammed, but it would take time to refill. So, a low, dangerous drawl cut through the stillness. "That's what you've been hiding." Unohana didn't look up, but she knew the voice. Shunsui Kiraku stood a few paces away, his usual lazy posture gone. He was tense, his hands resting on the hilts of his twin blades, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity she hadn't seen since the war. "Against the Quincy 1,000 years ago. I wasn't hiding it, Shunsui," she replied, her voice calm, though the melody was gone, replaced by a flat, cold monotone. "You all simply forgot how to look." "We didn't forget," Soifun snapped. Appearing beside Kiraku, her small frame vibrating with a mixture of fury and fear. "You lied. For 1,000 years, you've worn the face of a healer, a pacifist. You built an entire division on the premise of preserving life. And what better way to master the art of killing than by mastering the art that reverses it?" Unohana countered coolly, finally rising to her feet. She stood protectively over Naruto, her loose hair framing a face that was now a perfect, unreadable mask. To know every way to save a life is to know every way to take one. They are two sides of the same blade. This chillingly logical statement was met with stunned silence. It was a truth so simple and so terrifying that none of them had ever considered it. Suddenly, a new pressure slammed into the courtyard. It was jagged, wild, and filled with a singular, manic purpose. It was not the overwhelming force Kenpachi had unleashed before. This was a focused, honed point of killing intent. Kenpachi Zaraki stood at the edge of the courtyard, his torn shihakusho barely clinging to his frame. His eye patch was still on, but his eye was wide, glowing with an insane, joyous light. He wasn't looking at the other captains. He wasn't looking at Naruto. He was staring at Unohana, and the look on his face was one of rapturous, religious revelation. He had been roused from his forced stupor not by a healer, but by the colossal spike of her killing intent. It was a call to his very soul, the answer to a question he hadn't even known he was asking his entire life. The feeling of being completely and utterly outmatched. The presence of a predator so far above him it was laughable, it wasn't a source of frustration. It was the ultimate thrill. "You," Zaraki breathed, the word a reverent prayer. "It was you. All this time." He took a step forward, his hand gripping the hilt of his zanpakuto so tightly his knuckles were white. The other captains tensed, ready for another fight. "Stand down, Zaraki," Yamamoto commanded, his voice a low growl, though even he seemed shaken. "This is not the time." But Zaraki wasn't listening. His world had shrunk to a single point, the woman standing before him. The source of that sublime, terrifying pressure. The original. "Fight me," Zaraki said, his voice not a demand, but a plea. A wide, ecstatic grin spread across his face. "Please." Before Unohana could respond, a new, more insidious threat made itself known. A section of the air near the center of the courtyard began to shimmer and distort. It wasn't the ordered geometry of the dimensional seal, nor the brutal tearing of Naruto's arrival. This was a sickening, oily ripple in the fabric of space. From this distortion, a figure stepped out. He was tall and unnervingly handsome, with slicked back silver hair and eyes the color of polished obsidian. He wore a simple, elegant black suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. He carried no weapon. His smile was charismatic, reassuring, and utterly devoid of warmth. He radiated an aura of calm, intellectual superiority, and a profound, soul-crushing emptiness. It was the cold of the Vanth, but it wasn't mindless. It was intelligent. It was refined. My, the man said, his voice smooth as velvet, a cultured, pleasant baritone. What a delightful little insurrection. It seems my new associate was a bit more enthusiastic than effective. He glanced at the spot where Coin had dissolved and gave a theatrical sigh. It's so hard to find good help these days. Every captain's hand went to their sword. This man's spiritual pressure was wrong. It didn't feel like a Shinigami, a hollow, or a Quincy. It felt like a void. A calm, well-spoken, and utterly malevolent void. Who are you? Yamamoto demanded, his Su beginning to flare like the corona of the sun. The man gave a slight, courtly bow. Forgive my manners. I am merely a humble servant. A missionary, if you will. You may call me Cassian. I am a herald of the eschaton, the weaver of ends. Quote, the name sent a jolt through Unohana. The weaver of ends. The entity from Coin's mad rantings, from the forbidden texts. The primeval force of nothingness. He field your late colleague created was a crude instrument, Cassian continued, his gaze sweeping over the assembled captains with dismissive amusement. A sledgehammer. My methods are a bit more surgical. He looked down at Naruto, who was beginning to stir, groaning as consciousness returned. Ah, the little sun god awakens. Splendid. I was so hoping to have a word. Cassian raised a hand, and a thin, black line, a crackle of pure anti-existence, shot from his fingertip toward Naruto. Bakudo number 81. Denku. A voice shouted. Tessai Tsukubishi, having arrived during the commotion, slammed his hands together, erecting a massive, transparent wall of Kido between Cassian and Naruto. The black line struck the Denku. It didn't shatter it. It didn't explode. It simply unwrote it. The Kido barrier dissolved at the point of contact. A hole appearing in it that spread rapidly, consuming the entire spell in less than a second. Quaint, Cassian remarked with a bored sigh. He took a step toward Naruto. But his path was blocked. Unohana stood there, her Bankai still active, the sea of blood bubbling at her feet. And beside her, a mirror image of her stance, was Kenpachi Zaraki, his eye patch now removed, the full, unrestrained force of his power roaring to life. Get in line, Zaraki growled at her, his grin ferocious. He's mine. He is a threat to my patient, Unohana stated, her voice flat. Therefore, he is my prey. They weren't speaking to each other so much as declaring their intent to the universe. An impossible, terrifying alliance had just formed. The first Kenpachi and the 11th, the Master and the Inheritor. The two most powerful sword wielders in the history of the Soul Society, united not by friendship, but by a shared, bloodthirsty purpose. Cassian paused, an amused smirk playing on his lips. He looked from Unohana's sea of corrosive blood to Zaraki's mountain of raw power. A trinity of blades, he mused. The blade of ruin, the blade of dissolution, and, his eyes flickered to Naruto, who was now being helped to his feet by Kakashi and Sakura, the blade of life, it would seem. How poetic. Naruto was groggy, his body screaming in protest, his reserves still dangerously low. But his senses were sharp. He could feel the intelligent void in front of him, the charismatic herald. And he could feel the two monsters of the sword standing before him, their killing intent a shield of pure, terrifying force. You don't get it, do you? Naruto said, his voice weak but clear. His friends looked at him, surprised. All of you, you think you can cut him. You think you can fight him. He bleeds. He dies. Zaraki grunted, his focus entirely on Cassian. He's not made of anything that can bleed, Naruto countered, pushing himself upright. He was still weak, but his mind was clear. He's like the Vanth. He's a hole. You can't cut a hole. Then what do we do? Sakura asked, her hands glowing with green chakra, ready to defend him. You buy me time, Naruto said, his gaze hardening. He looked at Unohana and Zaraki. Both of you, don't try to kill him. It's a waste of energy. Just keep him busy. Don't let him touch me. Unohana glanced back at him, a flicker of understanding in her cold eyes. She gave a single, sharp nod. Zaraki just laughed. As long as I get to cut him, I don't care what you call it. With a roar, Zaraki charged. His attack was not the wild swing from before. It was a focused, two-handed cleave, pouring all of his immense, unsealed power into a single, devastating line. Cassian simply smiled and held up a hand. A small, swirling disk of blackness, no bigger than a dinner plate, appeared before him. Zaraki's blade struck the disk and stopped dead. All the force, all the Retsu, all the killing intent of the blow was simply absorbed. Vanished. Zaraki's eyes widened in shock and fury. Crude, but impressive, Cassian said conversationally. All that power, all that wasted energy, it's the fundamental flaw of creation. So inefficient. While Zaraki was stalled, Unohana attacked. She didn't move herself. She sent a wave of her Bankai's blood surging forward, attempting to engulf Cassian. Cassian tutted, a disappointed sound. He flicked his wrist, and a dozen of the black, energy-eating discs appeared, hovering in the air around him. The wave of blood struck the discs and was consumed, vanishing into the voids. He was negating her Bankai as effortlessly as he had negated Zaraki's strike. A conceptual acid, Cassian mused, analyzing her power with academic detachment. Fascinating. It dissolves matter by enforcing its own state upon it. But my state is nothing. And nothing, my dear captain, always wins. The other captains, realizing this was a foe beyond any they had ever faced, finally moved. Bankai. Senbon Sakura Kajiyoshi, Byakuya intoned, and a billion swirling blades descended on Cassian. Hitsugayas, Dagur and Hyarinmaru, sent a colossal dragon of ice roaring down. Hieraku's Shikai swirled to life. Its game-like rules attempting to impose themselves on the battlefield. It was a symphony of destruction. And it was utterly useless. Cassian stood in the heart of the storm, his bored smile never wavering. His swirling black discs intercepted every attack. The flower petals dissolved. The ice dragon was eaten. Hieraku's games failed to even register, as their rules required a participant who existed in a conventional sense. Is that it? Cassian asked, a hint of genuine disappointment in his voice. Is this the might of the Gote 13? How dreadfully underwhelming. While the captains threw their power against the immovable wall of the void, Naruto was working. He wasn't trying to replenish his power. He was changing it. He knelt on the ground, his hands pressed together, concentrating. He remembered the feeling of touching Unohana's scar, the gentle, empathetic warmth, not of overwhelming creation, but of focused understanding. He remembered the feeling of weaving the nexus for the Biju, the intricate, complex artistry. He couldn't fight the void by filling it. Not now. He was too weak. But maybe he didn't have to. The Vanth was a mindless hunger. This herald, Cassian, was an intelligence. He had a body, a form. He was a conduit for the void, but he himself was not the void. He was a vessel, and a vessel could be broken. Zaraki, Unohana, Naruto shouted, his voice ringing with new power. He stood up, his eyes glowing not with the overwhelming gold of his divine state, but with a sharp, focused blue. A thin, precise blade of golden energy, no longer than his forearm, formed in his right hand. It wasn't a sun, it was a scalpel. Don't attack him. Attack what he's standing on. The two Kenpachi, instinctively recognizing a superior strategy, acted instantly. Zaraki, with a roar, brought his blade down not on Cassian, but on the ground at his feet, the blow shattering the courtyard and destabilizing his footing. Simultaneously, Unohana sent a targeted stream of her Bankai knot at Cassian's body. But at the ground beneath him, dissolving it into a bubbling pool of acid. For the first time, Cassian's smug composure faltered. He was forced to leap back, his leg, ant suit now spattered with dirt and acid. The momentary distraction was all Naruto needed. He moved. He was a golden blur, faster than he had ever been, his depleted energy focused into a single, explosive burst of speed. He appeared directly in front of the surprised herald. You're not a hole, Naruto said, his blue eyes boring into Cassian's black ones. You're a plug, and I'm here to pull you. He thrust the golden scalpel of life energy forward. He didn't aim for Cassian's heart or his head. He aimed for the center of his chest, the point from which he seemed to be channeling his power. Cassian tried to form one of his null discs, but he was too slow. Naruto's blade was a conceptual attack, just like his own. It wasn't meant to cut flesh. It was meant to cut connections. The golden scalpel plunged into Cassian's chest. There was no blood. There was no wound. But Cassian screamed. It was a high, thin, electronic sound, like a modem being ripped from a wall. His connection to the eschaton, to the great, infinite void that gave him his power, was being severed by Naruto's blade of pure, concentrated life. Impossible. Cassian shrieked as golden cracks spread across his body from the point of impact. You are weakened, drained. I don't need an ocean to kill a serpent, Naruto grunted, pushing the blade deeper. I just need enough water to drown it. With a final, shattering cry, Cassian's body dissolved. Not into nothingness, but into a shower of black, static-like particles that faded before they hit the ground. His final, whispered words echoed in Naruto's mind. He is not a force to be fought. He is a truth to be accepted. The weaver will unmake the loom. Naruto stood there, panting, the golden blade in his hand dissolving. He had won, but he was running on fumes. He looked up at the two Kenpachi. Zaraki was staring at him, his initial bloodlust replaced by a look of grudging, confused respect. Unohana had dismissed her Bankai. The serene captain was back, though her eyes, as they met Naruto's, held a fiery intensity that had not been there before. They had worked together. The raw power of Zaraki, the conceptual lethality of Unohana, and the divine precision of Naruto. A trinity of blades, indeed. They had faced an enemy that had outclassed their entire military force and had, against all odds, emerged victorious. But the herald's dying words were a chilling prophecy. They hadn't defeated the threat. They had merely swatted its messenger. The true enemy, the Weaver of Ends, was still out there. And its goal was not conquest. It was obliteration. Chapter 8 End.